meeting. We're grateful to have you joining us. As you've probably seen, we continue to hold electronic meetings due to the practice of social distancing. Although conducting our meetings electronically is different from our familiar in-person public processes, this is still considered an open and public meeting. For the work session, we welcome members of the public who may be watching using video feeds on the Council's agenda page, YouTube, SLC TV, or Facebook Live. As many of you know, there's no public comment during our work session. Excuse me. Thank you. There's no public comment during our work session. However, please join us for the 7 p.m. formal meeting tonight to share any comments you have on either a public hearing item or a general comment that you wish to express that isn't listed for a specific public hearing. Your feedback is always welcome, and you can reach the City Council anytime by mailing us at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114-5476, or emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or by calling our 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. We'll now turn the time over to our work session items. Item number 1 is in our update from the administration. So I will turn the time over to Erin Mendenhall, the mayor, Rachel Otto, chief of staff, and Lisa Schaefer, the chief administrative officer, if any of them are available to join us.
Hi, Mr. Chair.
Hi.
I'm here. I'll start, and then Rachel will give you an update on homelessness following. On the COVID front, we've been anticipating that numbers would be a little bit lower this week because testing was down due to the holiday. And of course, we're still monitoring the local data with the county health department and working with them to try and build on enforcement capacity, which, as you know, in businesses, that enforcement is done by the county health department, not Salt Lake City. This week, we're hoping to hear from Salt Lake County on whether or not we will receive a third distribution of the CARES funding that they have in hand, and we've anticipated receiving it all along, but we're looking for that clarity and hope to get it this week. They're doing their best right now to plan of the vaccination rollout, as well as help cities meet the needs of their residents. So we've articulated our needs and what we would do and with the third tranche of funding. And I know that the council has seen that. So happy to answer any questions about our proposal for the third tranche, but hopefully some information on whether or not we get it. And police department has established some specific shifts to respond to calls for large gatherings on Fridays and Saturdays in Salt Lake City. They haven't received many calls reporting parties basically, but they are available to respond if so. We've actually been able to reappropriate grant that allows us to put some personnel toward the approach will be educational and military compliance. It would allow us to deploy that level. Are there any questions in council on COVID? Rachel. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions, council members? It doesn't look like it. So Rachel, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good to see you all. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to update you on the community commitment program and on plans for winter shelter. On the first point, the VOA and our other outreach partners are still working in the areas of 500 West and the 9th South area. It's hasn't been as as big of an operation as our resource fair on 700 South, but they're still there working. And again, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we met with you, we are not planning on any closure of those areas to camping until we have more winter shelter options online. So the good news is that the resource centers have been open to new intakes, and that has been going, that has opened up some capacity and has been going a bit more smoothly, and hotel vouchers have been available. But as I'm sure you all know, we are not yet ready to launch the winter shelter. I shouldn't say we, but I should say the coalition as a whole, which we're obviously engaged with. But that the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness is still working to find a second overflow location. The first overflow location that they have identified next week. That's a 60-bed facility for men, and not in Salt Lake City, but they are they're just making the final preparations to open that location early next week. So in terms of the second location, there are still some moving parts on that, and we are hoping to get more clarity on where that is in the next couple of days. So we'll be in touch with council staff on that as soon as we hear anything. I also just wanted to mention back on the community commitment program front that we did install 2 portable restrooms in the area of 900 South. That was a request from some of the surrounding property owners to help mitigate some of the issues they were seeing in that area. We're planning on keeping those portable restrooms there until we have other options for places for people to go in that area, and until we close that area to camping. So they're there right now, and I think that's providing a couple of options for people in that area. Do you have any questions on those 2 things?
Any questions from council members? I don't see any. So
I think, Mr. Chair, the next item on the updates from the administration is Chief Brown talking about the police department standing item. And I think that he's prepared before he gets to the main item he wants to talk about today, to talk about some of the work that the police department has done in the St. Mark's area, also related to individuals experiencing homelessness. So I'll pass it to him to complete that item and then move on to the police department item.
great, thank you. Thanks for being here, Chief Brown. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Chief.
I'm sorry about that. Last week we had a meeting with some of the leadership of the St. Mark's Cathedral. We met with Rhonda Uber, Ron Barnes, the mayor, Weston Clark, and quite a few members of the staff to talk about the issues and concerns. And what we found out is along the west side of the cathedral, they were having a lot of people just hanging out there. And these were very shelter resistant people. Throughout the summer and in the fall months, we've been over there doing outreach, but many of them just don't want any services. And there was a kind of a criminal element that was hanging out, dealing drugs and different nefarious activities. And so over the weekend, we focused not only undercover assets, but patrol assets. Captain Lance Van Dongen over the Central Division Patrol amassed different units and squads, took some of the overtime monies and put people over there. We made several arrests, but just the sheer presence of being there really moved a lot of that criminal element out of the area. And I think one of the things that really paid off was we put one of our cameras over there, the overt cameras, right on the corner of First South and Second East, which really has made a big difference. I talked to Rhonda last night, and she was very happy and thankful for our efforts, and it seemed to be making a difference. So we'll continue with those activities throughout the next few weeks.
Great, thank you. And then did you want to update us on any other policing items?
Yes, I do. And this is a big thing. We have gone to the drawing board, and we have remodeled and put together a new model for our CIU, our Community Intelligence Unit, which are the 7 officers that represent each council district and liaison with council members and staff, community councils, and different stakeholders throughout the city. And what we've come down to, and I think I have a couple things that I'd like to share. And when you look at this visually, I'll kind of walk through what it is now and what we're going to try to achieve with this new model. But just historically, several years ago, this used to be part of our sergeant promotional process. If you can share the diagram showing the CIU versus the COPC diagram. Can you guys see that? Can you see it?
No, sorry, not yet.
Okay. I think I sent it to Ben, so he was going to have somebody pull it up. But it used to be CIU was part of our sergeant's training program, and it really kind of instilled the importance of community outreach and community policing. But the problem was it became very short-lived. Officers would rotate in and out. And so as community members got to know faces and individuals, they would shortly be transferred out of that unit. And it was kind of frustrating because it seemed to be that, every 6 months or every, sometimes the longest was a year, they were getting new officers in that position. So we made it a permanent assignment where it wasn't built into the sergeant promotion process, and it worked much better. But if you look to the left where it says CIU, that was the configuration. You had the 7 district CIU officers that took different liaison with the community, problems, issues, concerns, and they took it to their sergeant. Their sergeant headed up that unit, and then he took it to an administrative lieutenant. But that entire program existed within the Liberty Division. And so Captain Rich Lewis right now is the captain over that division. But all the requests, all the issues and problems for the entire city came up and through his division. And then he would do his best to push those back out to the Pioneer Division and the Central Division, but that was not a very efficient model. Many times we had officers or CIU officers that were trying to work on problems, say on the west side, where they were trying to get resources, and they would have to go back through their command, which was back through Liberty, to get maybe a west side a Pioneer bike patrol to put some efforts on to an area like North Temple and 800 West. It wasn't really effective. And so what we're going to do, or what we're trying to do under this new model, and we've not COPC anymore because that name just didn't sound very good, COPC. Anyway, we've retiled it. We'll fix this diagram, but it's going to be the Division Community Liaison Officer. And so what we have done, and the biggest shift, is we have made these officers and this position geographically responsible to the patrol division in which they oversee and represent. So for instance, in Pioneer, those District 1 and 2, that officer will report to the command staff of the Pioneer Division. In Liberty, the 5, 6, and 7 will report up and through the Liberty Division. And in Central, Districts 3 and 4, that officer will report directly to the Central Division. And now instead of having one officer trying to work on different community problems and trying to find the resources to address those things, council members, you have a command staff at your disposal to work on those problems. I mean, you'll have not only the officer, the divisional community liaison officer, but you'll have the sergeant, the sergeant over the bike squad, you'll have the Liberty Division lieutenant, and you'll have a captain that will be working on those problems to address all the community needs that you may have. I think this will provide a much better model, and it'll be much more productive. It'll streamline the communication. It'll help us work closer with the city assets as far as the civil enforcement team, HART, CAT, the mayor's liaison to the community, the health department, and other nonprofit government organizations. But I think the true benefit will be that we can now pull this geographic responsibility and accountability into our CompStat model. So these officers will bring these problems to CompStat, and we'll talk about them. We'll address them. We'll look at the hotspots in the intel, and we'll report back. And so in talking with Ben Lutke earlier today, Ben and Allison attend many CompStat meetings, and now they will start seeing CIU problems and issues discussed in CompStat. but more importantly, what we've done so we can report back to you as council members. With that, I'd like to open it up for any questions you may have.
Council members, any question? Councilmember Johnson, go ahead.
Thanks, Chief. I appreciate the overview. The details are helpful. I think I understand your communication argument as far as streamlining that through the precincts. Just sort of initial observation from looking at the diagram, what it looks like is the detective now, say in District 2, is now going to take on both District 1 and District 2.
Right.
Is that going to sort of offset the improved communication by spreading them thinner? Is the concern that's sort of coming immediately to my head, and I can see my the folks in Glendale and Poplar Grove asking that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. What I think it'll do is it will only be one officer, but he's going to bring a command, an entire command to the table to attend those meetings and to address problems and issues. So when you have community council meetings, not only would, I mean, in the past, you would have Detective Eldon Oliver there to address the community, but I can see him working very closely with the bike sergeant assigned to each division. And just as a reminder, each division, Liberty, Central, and Pioneer, has a bike squad at their disposal. And so I see this officer working hand in glove with the sergeant over those bike squads to those different areas, but also bringing the lieutenant and captain to meetings. So I think on paper, you may see just one, but I think in action, and the way I hope this works is that we'll bring a team to address those issues. So I'd like to see not only the officer become very well known to the community, but also that entire command staff. And I kind of go back to the problem that we discussed, or Councilmember Johnson, that you've been working on all summer long, is the North Temple and 800 West. Eldon attended many meetings over there on Friday afternoons, as well as a lot of us. I went to some of the meetings, and I would see Eldon doing the very best he could, but he didn't really have the command and the resources to do what he needed to do. So I attended, and then I said, well, why isn't the captain of the Pioneer Division here? And then I think you saw Captain Beener attend, and then you saw, I think, some of his lieutenants attend. So what we really did is put this model into action. And I think a lot of the benefits and things we have been able to accomplish over on North Temple have been at the fruits of this type of model. So I'm hoping that this will be a better model for all. If you'll put up the next slide, let me show you who your community liaison officers are going to be. They've been selected. And I want you to know, we put this out for people to put in, and we had over 12 officers put in, which is quite a few for this assignment. So Captain John Beener will be over Pioneer Patrol. His lieutenant is Russ Ammett, and his division community liaison officer will be Eldon Oliver. So we'll maintain that consistency over there in Districts 1 and 2. Captain Lance Van Dongen in Central, his executive lieutenant is Andy Leonard, and he'll have Officer Bob Norgard. I don't know if any of you have met Bob, but he's a he's a great officer, and he'll do a great job for Central. And then in Liberty, we have Captain Richard Lewis, Lieutenant Gary Trost is the lieutenant, and then the division community liaison officer. That is a mouthful to say. We'll have to come up with an acronym on that, but it'll be Nate Meiser. So what I'm hoping, Council, is next week, I'd like to arrange through your staff to have a meet and greet to where we can get online and I can introduce the team and make sure you have the emails and the cell numbers so that you can have that team at your disposal. And then after the new year, I'd like to meet with all the community councils in the very same way, attend their meetings, bring the team, introduce these entire teams to the community. Now, I know we're going to tweak this and there'll be some things that we'll want to work on, but I don't want to wait a year or even 6 months to figure out we've got a problem. I want to reassess and talk to you and your staff and the mayor and her staff and our stakeholders in the city. I'd like to review the process every month to see how we're doing. And then if you have feedback or any ways we can make this better, I would welcome that. But I expect to do a review of this monthly with many of you and your staff to see where we're doing and how we're doing.
Okay. Questions, council members? Councilmember Rogers.
Just, it's not a nuance little item, but when we switched from from a mayor's liaison per district down to covering several districts, sometimes they don't make it to all of the community council meetings when we're there. So I know that this is one of those little deals. The mayor knows this, as we were actually part of that whole process of sergeants being promoted through this process. And, this will be my 7th now, I believe, CIU detective chief. And I've been over this with you that, when we're talking about West Side residents getting to know their individuals, when we're changing like this constantly, it's a problem. So council members, I've been through 7, I've CIU detectives. So here we are, and I can tell you all of them have been fantastic, but it's the consistency that we've got to make sure that we're not downgrading the service, because Detective Curdy, he's been fantastic for District 1, and you keep on telling me that this way it's going to streamline the process, but everything gets changed for some reason, and some things get left behind. I just want to make sure that is not being left behind, Chief. So
Yeah.
When we did downgrade from the mayor's liaison to do that, I don't want to see the same thing happen to this.
No, council member, that's a great point, and I respect your position there. And it's my commitment to you, council, that I'll be checking in with you to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the communities you serve. And I know there's a lot of meetings for people to attend to, and even with 7 different CIU officers, there were times we couldn't make all the meetings. So if there are overlapping meetings or meetings at the same time, I would expect the liaison officer to be at one, and maybe the lieutenant to be at the other, or even the captain. And so instead of just one trying to juggle all those different meetings, I'm hoping to have that team cover those meetings. And again, that will familiarize the entire command staff to the community that they're trying to serve.
Other questions, council members? Okay. Thank you, Chief. Did you have any other police department items that you wanted to go through?
I've got a lot, but not for today. I think we're going to do this weekly, so I'll keep it brief, and because I know your time is very valuable. But thank you for the time and for all you do for us.
Thank you, Chief. Back to the mayor and Rachel. Did you have any other items that you wanted to address under this agenda item, or are we ready to move on to the equity and racial equity and policing issues?
That's all we have for you today, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Or did we already cover the racial inequity issues in, do you have any additional updates for this agenda item, or?
One of our staff members has some information.
Oh, okay, great. Thank
I believe,
you.
yeah,
Is that you, Allison?
yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Allison. Go ahead.
Well, I have information for the racial equity and policing section. I don't know if the mayor and our staff have finished with their section.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is just an update on the Racial Equity and Policing Commission schedule. As you know, they meet on Wednesdays, but with the holidays coming up at the end of the month, then there's a slight change to their schedules. So on December 2nd, December 9th, and December 16th, there will be subcommittee meetings. And then on December 23rd and 30th, there are no meetings at all. So again, that's December 2nd, 9th, and 16th. There will be subcommittee meetings. As you know, these are open to the public. The 3 subcommittees that meet are Policy and Practice, which is at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. School Safety Subcommittee also at 4 p.m. and the Training Subcommittee, which is at 5 p.m. on Wednesdays. So 2 at 4 o'clock, 1 at 5 o'clock. For anyone who'd like to join these meetings, you can go to the Salt Lake City Boards and Commissions page, which has a link to the RAP Commission, or you can go directly to www.slc.gov/boards/REP agenda. That's slc.gov/boards/REP agenda. Anyone who has questions can check the link on that page as well, or just write to repcommission@slcgov.com. So any of those options will get you in contact with the organizers of the REP Commission meetings, and will get you access to the agenda. So that's, I believe, all we have for that update. Unless someone interrupts, then not interrupts, has questions, how's that, has questions, or tells me that other things need to be added, then we can move to the CRB review.
I don't see any questions. So go ahead and move on to the CRB.
Great. So this is a follow-up discussion to the August 11th, 2020 briefing, which reviewed the Civilian Review Board's basic structure and scope in the existing ordinance. So what we're going to do today is, I understand the chair wants to do straw polls of a list of changes that were proposed by council members to the CRB ordinance. And then there is also a list of additional ways that can reinforce the board's authority and profile, including budget changes and some issues for future council discussion. These proposals came from meetings, which you probably remember, with the CRB members and the administrator/investigator of the CRB, which were held in September and October. And then they're also based on some helpful feedback that came from the public on how to improve the CRB. And I do want to note, before we get into the straw polls, that the intention of all these proposed measures is to strengthen this body, which is already working well. No one seemed to have complaints or concerns about the way the board is actually functioning, but the intention is to facilitate its role so that it can provide this detailed independent review of complaints of police misconduct. And as you know, the CRB also reviews every officer-involved critical incident, or OICI, including police shootings, whether or not a complaint is filed. So if you'd like, Mr. Chair, we could go to the summary list of items for council consideration on page 7 and go through them. You can also look at the potential straw polls that are listed at the end of each of the items in section B and C of your staff reports.
Okay.
Should we just grind through them?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. So the first potential straw poll is to amend city ordinance to extend the period for which to file a complaint with the CRB to 30 days after filing with the police department. So would you like me to go through any sort of summary of this issue, or do you want to just go ahead and see if anyone wants to do the straw poll?
And give just a brief summary, and then we can ask for questions and then a poll.
Sure. So essentially, the existing ordinance only allows 4 days for a civilian or another police officer to file a complaint with the CRB once the complaint has been filed with the police department. The council can set the number of days it prefers, and the city attorney suggested 30 days as after filing with the police department would be a reasonable starting point. I want to note that a complaint can also be filed directly with the CRB, but these are for complaints that go first through the police department. So it could be 30 days, it could be any number of days that the council prefers.
Okay. Do council members have any thoughts on this, questions? If not, then I would appreciate it if somebody wanted to call for a straw poll. Councilmember Fowler?
Do we feel that 30 days is sufficient amount of time? Certainly 4 days is not, in my opinion. And we talked about that a little bit during a small group meeting that I had. I just also don't necessarily I don't want to extend it indefinitely, obviously, but do want to make sure that people feel they have adequate time to understand and get their complaint filed. So I am in support of extending it. I'm just wondering if we need more than 30 days, or if anyone feels that we would need more than 30 days.
Amy, I'm sorry, Councilmember Fowler, do you have any sense of how long you sort of leaning towards, just gut reaction, or?
I mean, honestly, my gut reaction is just is 60 days. I find that if you have to get a complaint together, if there's any documentation, if you have, gathering all of that and then being able to make a complaint, not that you would need that to make the complaint, but I was kind of leaning more towards 60 days. But again, I don't want to extend it indefinitely or think that that's too much time. So I'm open. I just that was my first thought when I was reading through these.
Is there any compelling sort of argument for 30 days as sort of a medium point? I don't know if Rick Rasmussen or anybody else has anything to contribute on this.
And I neglected to mention when we started that both Katie Lewis, the city attorney, is here to answer questions, and as you saw, Councilmember Johnston, Rick Rasmussen is also here.
And council members, I'm happy to jump in. There was some internal discussion about where to put that number of days, and remember, it's the days not after the incident, but after a complaint has been also filed with the police department. So, it sort of is one of the triggers is the complaint with the police department. And then we thought, well, 30 days after that would be enough time where you're sort of thinking about it already. And it's that same complaint that then would also be made to the CRB. But there's no magic to 30 days. And if 60 days feels like a more ample opportunity to let people think about things and get their documents in order, there's no problem with that either.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
The clock starts on a complaint to the police department. If I'm a regular citizen, am I notified in any way when that clock starts? How would I find that out, I guess, to know when my time frame would be to ask for, to file with the CRB?
So, Councilmember, I believe that when someone, typically it would be the alleged victim of a complaint who would do the filing. And we understand that the police department will notify and does notify people who make a complaint that they also can file with the CRB. But as I mentioned before, you can also file directly with the CRB.
And Councilmember Johnston, just to put a finer point on that, the ordinance actually requires the police department to notify the complainant that they also have the right to file with the Civilian Review Board. So it's an affirmative obligation that the department has when they receive the complaint.
Is there a situation where you could file with the Civilian Review Board but not file with the police department?
You can certainly do that, but the second I get the complaint, I send it to IA so that they can open the case, because I've got to have an opened IA case to proceed. So de facto, it gets done automatically.
So if I'm a victim, I don't file with the police department, but I want to file at some point in the future. There's no statute of limitations on that?
Not on my end, and not that I've observed. I think we had a case recently in the last 6 months that was from 3 or 4 years ago. Sometimes it takes a while for folks to come forward on these types of things. Police department's been great. Every time a complaint's come in, even that far back, they open a case, we do the investigation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I would be supportive of Councilmember Fowler's. It's not really a straw poll at this point, but the inclination to maybe extend the 30 days a little farther than that.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions about the time period? If not, can we get a straw poll, please?
Mr. Chair, I would move to have a straw poll, sorry, working to support changing the ordinance to allow 60 days for a complaint to be filed.
Okay. Is there any questions about the straw poll or any debate? Okay, go ahead and indicate your support. I am seeing a thumbs up from Councilmember Fowler, Johnston, Mono, Dugan, Rogers, and myself, and Councilmember Valdemoros is absent. All right, thanks, Allison. You want to take us to the next item?
Sure. The second proposed straw poll is to amend city ordinance to allow appointment of the CRB to the CRB of people with nonviolent felonies and certain misdemeanors in their past, but who have completed their sentences. So right now, the CRB ordinance may actually be unnecessarily reducing the population that can be considered to serve on the board. And we've been told that this may be especially crucial in the case of people of color. So the proposed change would allow anyone who has nonviolent felonies or misdemeanors who has completed his or her sentence to be named to the CRB. That is basically it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would propose a straw poll to support this change.
Okay, so the straw poll is to allow anybody with nonviolent felonies or misdemeanors who have completed any terms of their sentence or probation to serve on the board. Does anyone have any questions or any debate about this?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Allison, did we get any feedback from PD about this? I don't think we're missing or the attorney's office.
I didn't, but both Katie and I believe Chief Brown may still be here as well.
Katie, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. My understanding is that the question for the felony convictions was whether or not the individuals could go on ride-alongs. And that's probably a question to ask Chief Brown of how that would be affected. But there may be ways for CRB members to be trained without going on ride-alongs. And the fact that these individuals have completed their sentences that conviction didn't seem to be enough of a barrier to keep them off of the civilian review board, given their obligations on the board.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, yes.
I just, perhaps one of the things that we could do is ask the administration whether the police the requirement relating to the ride-alongs is a police rule or a police practice or norm, and whether that's something that they would reconsider on the concept that once someone has paid their debt to society, there ought not be additional punishment.
Chief Brown, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm checking right now, even as we speak, but it may be that we have to do a BCI check on those that do a ride along with us. So that perhaps is an internal policy that we can adjust as Cindy's talking about. The one question is that there might be criminal justice information that cannot be shared. But let me get back to you on that. Can you give me can I report back next week on that, or are you going to vote on that tonight?
We were anticipating a vote hopefully tonight, so pending all of these straw polls. But I think council members, like what the city attorney has said is that that there are possible workarounds even if a person can't do a ride along. And so I think we don't necessarily need that information in order to move forward today. Is that what I heard, Katie? Okay. Councilmember Fowler?
So I would suggest if we're supportive of this change, then maybe there is some language or legislative intent to still have Chief Brown bring back this other information so that we can clarify that in the future as well.
Okay. Do you want to make a straw poll, Councilmember Feller?
Well, I already made my straw poll to support this, and then I don't know if we want another second straw poll to include a legislative intent that, I mean, I guess at this point I'm just making a straw poll. So I would propose a straw poll that we support the change of allowing people who have been convicted of nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors but have completed their sentence to be allowed to be on the CRB, and a legislative intent that Chief Brown bring back information regarding ride-alongs and convicted people that convicted of felonies and misdemeanors not being able to do those ride-alongs. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it. Does everyone understand the straw poll? Any questions or debate about that? Okay, go ahead and indicate whether you support or not support. Okay, so I've got me, Councilmember Fowler, Councilmember Johnston, Councilmember Dugan, Mono, and Rogers. So that's unanimous with Councilmember Valdemoros absent.
Okay, moving on to number 3. The straw poll would be to amend city ordinance to ensure that all panels include at least 5 board members rather than the minimum of 3, which is currently permitted. So as you may recall, the specific complaint cases are heard by panels of randomly selected CRB members. With the pandemic, the panels have moved online for the most part, but still a minimum number of board members need to be present to have the discussion with other board members. So everyone needs to be present simultaneously. There is concern among council members that the current ordinance allowing only 3 CRB members to hear and decide a complaint is too small. So this change would increase the minimum size of panels to 5 members. Now, to facilitate the ability of the administrator investigator to form 5-member panels in a timely manner, council members also have suggested expanding the number of CRB members to 21, which we look at in the next straw poll. But for now, the question is whether to change the ordinance to ensure that all panels include at least 5 board members rather than 3.
Any questions or discussion to this item?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Johnson.
I think what Allison brought up is a huge issue. If I support the 5-person panel, I have to support expanding the entire CRB in order to make anything happen, because it would really slow the process down if we can't get 5 people. And I'm worried about being able to fill a 21 board at this point or in the future. So I'm concerned about those next couple of motions we're looking at here, whether they're feasible or operational. I'm not opposed to the idea of it, but just operationally, we've had a hard time filling that board period, particularly from my district and others.
Councilmember Fowler?
Oh, Mr. Rogers was before me. Sorry, James, go ahead.
Oh, good. Councilmember Rogers, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say Andrew nailed it. That if we aren't looking at expanding it, I think that Rick would come on and say that he's already having hard enough time getting board members to come and fill these spots. So, and I know that the chair he's been doing every single one of them because he's not getting them filled. So that's my concern too. Is I'd love to say let's go to 5, but if we're not getting people to fill these seats, it's going to be way too hard to even do that.
It might be worth mentioning too that Rick Rasmussen, the administrator investigator, has mentioned that on particularly serious cases like OICIs and others, he makes a special effort to get 5, even though 3 is the minimum. That is an informal practice. It's not formalized in the ordinance, but that's how it's been reported so far.
Okay.
And, Mr. Chair? I don't want to jump ahead too much, but they're all sort of related. So number 5 would be in critical incidences needing 2/3 of sitting members. That means just those who are on the commission, not of the 21 open seats. Is that accurate, Allison?
Yes.
Okay.
And if it remains, if the council chooses to have the CRB number remain at 14, then that would be 9 members if all 14 positions are filled.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fowler?
May I ask where the complaint came from that 3 seemed like not enough on a panel, or where that concern, maybe not a complaint, but that concern came from?
I know I raised it. I don't know if other people did.
So we haven't heard that concern from people involved in the process, i.e. people who have made a complaint.
I'm not I don't know if Allison, have we?
I have not heard it. Perhaps Rick would like to comment if he's heard it.
Yeah, it's never been raised on any of the cases. And Allison's right on officer-involved shootings. I'll end up canvassing the entire sitting board to get 5 for a panel. And if it doesn't work, then we'll just delay the panel until we get 5. On some of the less serious cases, I think we've done cases with as little as 4, and 4 is problematic because it could be a tie vote. But it's very rare that we don't sit 5. It just might take us a little longer. If we bump up to 2/3, I think that we can anticipate delays.
If, Mr. Chair, if I could add, we have had several questions come about this, and it's been more since the additional scrutiny has been put on all matters relating to the police. But I'm not sure if it was the panel system was put in by administrative rule as opposed to by ordinance, but its existence was surprising to some of the people that we heard from. And so that's why it's that, in the interest of council members, is why it has remained on the list. And it's possible that the stipend that is raised later in the list of questions may be a factor in resolving this. A lot of the people who might be interested in this board are people who are working full-time or more than one job and aren't able to take time away from work. So I don't know if the stipend piece could be brought into this conversation, or if you consider it to be relevant.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a follow-up question to Cindy?
Yes, go ahead.
Cindy, when you said that it surprised people to hear that there was a panel system, were people expecting to be heard by the entire board, and that's what surprised them? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess it doesn't surprise me because I just think of the Court of Appeals, and you kind of get a panel with the Court of Appeals too. But okay, it's interesting.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
For the numbers 3, 4, and 5 that we've been sort of discussing together, I personally would feel a little more comfortable if we proceeded to say 6 and 7. I think number 7, the stipend, could be a nice litmus test in some ways to see if we can keep this board actively filled and see if we can expand it. I like the idea of expanding it. Frankly, I think we probably get some good decisions with more folks in the representation. I just don't want to hamstring them temporarily while we see if we can fill it or not until we have a little more evidence, perhaps.
Sure. So are you saying you want to skip down and have go through the items in reverse order?
Yeah, I guess. I think in my mind right now, I would probably vote no on 3, 4, and 5 currently, but I wouldn't be opposed to them in the future. I just don't want to say no, no, no. But no, there's a rationale in saying no to those three.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, if I remember correctly from reviewing this, that there's a legislative intent that and if there's not, I think we could make one, that we do a review of the CRB in X amount of time to see how the changes that we're making, whether that's if we decide to look at a stipend, if that's helping Rick fill spots, or make sure that panels are filled or things like that. To Andrew's point, I would probably vote no on 3, 4, and 5 until we see if the other changes are helping, or do a review of the CRB. So I wonder if we, and I can't, and Allison, I'm looking now, but I think I made that legislative intent up in my head, or we have it there.
No, you did make it up.
Oh, great. So we could do a legislative intent saying, let's do a review of the CRB again in X amount of time, even if it's in a year from now or something like that. I agree with Andrew. I think we could and should expand it, but I don't want to create more delays.
Well, I think that, Madam Fowler and Mr. Chair, I think number 6 is there's a 12-month kind of annual council briefing from the CRB. Maybe that's where this is coming, the idea came from. I think that'd be a nice natural time to review it.
All right, Council Member Fowler, are you talking about after we give the maybe increase the stipend and see if that helps? Yeah, like do a straw poll on increase the stipend and then see if we're getting enough numbers to, hey, warrant going to 21 and going to 5. Yeah, I'm all for that, yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I just suggest a combination of the things?
Yes.
One thing you could do is you could, at this time, increase the board to 21, recognizing that those may not be filled. And so that you don't mess up the quorum, you could say define the quorum in this case as a majority of the number of seats filled. But that gives the administration a signal that you're interested in expanding the board, and it allows them to recruit people for the board and have a place to put them if they say yes. Because it would be kind of a chicken and an egg thing. I think it would be hard for them to try to recruit without having slots. So just a possibility.
So smart.
Yeah.
Yes. Has everyone had a chance to speak on this? I feel pretty strongly that like expanding the number of people that it is at least possible to have on the Police Civilian Review Board will help alleviate these problems. And I think getting rid of some of the barriers, or the background check barrier, I think is going to help as well. I would just like us to, even if we can't fill 21 seats, I think it would, based on my conversations with Rick, I think it would make, even if we don't do the 5 panel requirement, but still increase the number to 21, that would help at least do this sort of informal policy objective that he has to have 5 when there's an officer involved critical incident. So I would support what Cindy said as a combination of sort of everything we've discussed.
So, Mr. Chair, I can propose a straw poll.
Okay.
I would propose that we increase the number of seats to 21, that we define quorum as a majority of the people seated at that time, and that we have a review of the CRB in 12 months.
Okay. Sorry, does anybody have any questions or arguments? Councilmember Dugan?
just a question about the stipend. Is that just a separate straw poll? We'll take that separately. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that I agree with Councilmember Fowler. I just want to make sure it's included the 3 members representing each district is also part of that.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
On the straw poll itself was 21 CRB membership to 21 members with 3 members representing each district, just to be clear that it's evenly divided among all the districts.
Yes, of course. Any other discussion to this? Okay, go ahead and indicate whether you're supportive or not supportive. I'm seeing myself, Councilmember Fowler, Councilmember Romano, Councilmember Dugan, Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Rogers, all getting thumbs up with 1 absence, which is Councilmember Valdemoros. Okay.
So if you'd like to continue, I believe it's straw poll number 5. Nope, I apologize. It is number 6. The straw poll would be to amend city ordinance to require an annual council briefing about recommendations formulated by the CRB during the preceding 12 months. I wasn't clear whether that is included in the straw poll you just took. It sounded like it might not be.
No, the straw poll we just took was for a review of the ordinance in 12 months.
Right.
So this would be a reporting requirement of the board. Are there any questions or concerns about this? Okay.
I think we'll just, Mr. Chair, I think we'll just want to define what that report would entail for us. We don't have to do that now, though.
Okay. Anyone want to propose a straw poll then?
I would propose that we support this change.
Okay. Anyone have any questions or debate about this? Okay, go ahead and indicate your thoughts. Got a thumbs up from me, Councilmember Fowler, Councilmember Romano, Councilmember Dugan, Councilmember Johnson, and Councilmember Rogers. So that's unanimous with 1 absence.
Okay, if you'd like to continue on straw poll number 7, it would be to amend city ordinance to provide an honorarium to CRB members. Would you like me to go through the potential discussion on this?
Yes, please.
Okay. The question of whether to provide an honorarium to members of traditionally volunteer city boards and commissions has come up in several discussions with the council and in other forum. The first exception that the city has approved to this practice of not paying, of relying on volunteers, is the Commission for Racial Equity and Policing. Those members, as you probably remember, receive a fixed annual honorarium depending on their position in the group. So the idea is that the board members who are in the core commission, who do the agenda setting, who essentially spend a lot more time than many of the other board members, are paid slightly more than other members of the commission. As Cindy mentioned, a major benefit to payment or honorarium for board members is to potentially increase the diversity of the residents who are able to serve, since barriers like the cost of childcare, getting time away from work, transportation, high-speed internet access probably limit the representation of greater diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, age, gender, income group, and occupation. In addition to serving the goal of equity, this greater diversity could also lead to broader involvement from underrepresented communities, and that may in turn provide wider credibility for the CRB. So there is a policy question here for the council about whether they'd like to ask the mayor's office about its recent experience identifying new members, since they recently proposed several new members to the board. Or you could go on to the additional aspects that the council might wish to consider about providing an honorarium.
Okay, Mayor Mendenhall, or would you like to weigh in on that?
Sure. I wasn't expecting to, but I appreciate the invitation. The replacement of a couple of commissioners, because there's so much work involved, we simply had a couple of people whose other demands and obligations in life made them feel that they couldn't commit the time that's needed. And so our course was to ask them who they would suggest be the appointments in their stead. And those suggestions came from the commission participants themselves. Although we would have been open to exploring new people who aren't yet part of the commission, but that was the way I wanted to go, and it makes me think, as you just had a discussion about the CRB, that there, I don't know how often we ask as a city the board members to submit suggestions of folks that the city could reach out to fill board seats, and I'm sure that there's 6 reasons on one side and a half a dozen on the other of why that can or cannot help diversity on the board. But anyway, when it came to the commission, that was the course we took. And I think it may be one we want to explore with other boards and commissions in the future. Is there something else you wanted me to reflect on?
The honorarium, do you think that would assist in trying to help fill positions?
I absolutely do. I would like to, have a holistic conversation about all of the boards and commissions, what that cost may look like for the city, what the benefit may be. And I think that it would maybe some value in us surveying board and commission current participants, and then casting more of a public survey. We could even include folks who have applied for boards and commissions, but haven't had an opening come up that they were able to fill. But I think to ask outside of the boards and commissions as well, what barriers may prevent you from participating. And I think there's a lot of venues, whether it's community councils or neighborhood partners organization, Comunidades Unidas, and others that would probably help us in asking that question of the community, but it should be holistic.
Mm-hmm.
And one step further, Mr. Chair.
Uh-huh.
I would like, and I think if we wouldn't have had a flat budget this year, my administration probably would have brought this to you already, but we would like to consider not only I want to say honorarium, but the payment, the stipend to participate, but a suite of other supportive measures that the city could take, from childcare subsidy, transit subsidy, whether that's Lyft or UTA, also hosting the board and commission meetings at different locations around the city. Could be libraries, they could move from district to district, but I think there's a lot in addition to a stipend that could remove some barriers of participation, and we would like to bring that to you.
Okay. Okay, would anybody want to make a straw poll to this item or more discussion questions? Councilmember Romano?
A discussion question. I like the idea of providing a stipend or an honorarium to board members. I think it's good to recognize that it's real work that we're asking people to do, and that we want the best people to fill those seats as possible. My question on this one would be, is the honorarium tied to just being on the board, or would it be each time a case comes forward, whichever 3 or 5 or however many we determine is necessary for that case, that they would get a stipend for participating? So is it like each day that they participate, they get $50 or something like that?
And I think that's an open.
Sorry, that seems like it could help fill those spots.
And I think that may be an open question. In the staff report, I mentioned that the council may want to consider the difference between, for example, basing the entire stipend on the number of panels a person may serve on versus a basic sort of underlying stipend because each board member does have to go through a certain amount of training for the CRB. And I believe the mayor has some additional comments.
Yes, go ahead, Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I know that some state boards and commissions pay their one that I serve on. I haven't accepted the money, but I think it's $60 per meeting that some of the Department of Environmental Quality boards can give to participants. There's also a travel stipend, but of course those are statewide boards and some people are traveling a great deal to participate. I just bring it up to mention other government boards and commissions in the state that we could look to for cost establishment and how they've arrived at those stipends. I don't think that we need to necessarily make it up on the spot, but with the Commission on Racial Equity and Policing, we knew that that was a finite amount of work. Not that the work shouldn't continue, but I think, yeah, you know, we've been clear that those commissioners are tasked with a specific body of work, which will come to a conclusion, and the city will evolve the way that that continues and not be asking those same commissioners to necessarily continue. So I just want to pull that one out as a really unique board and commission in the city.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
It may also be useful to consider the different kinds of boards that the city has. Some boards are advisory only. I'm thinking of the Business Advisory Board, for example. And then some boards like the CRB, like the Planning Commission, have a certain amount of legal responsibility, or they have to make decisions because of rules and ordinance. So there may be some kind of, you know, a sort of categorization of different types of boards and the amount of responsibility or work that goes into each.
Katie, would it be possible to say today that we want to have in the ordinance that that people will receive an honorarium and then leave it to be determined later, like what that amount would be and how they receive it? Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I agree with the premise and I want to support it. I love the mayor's concept of providing as much support as we can for participation, particularly for underrepresented groups in our city. My concern right now is that the thing that keeps ringing in my head is how much time the Planning Commission, for instance, spends in their duties. And I think I'd want to flesh out the differentiation in who we would provide this to, which boards and commissions. And that might take a little time to come back to us with. So I want to support the idea. The intent is I'd like to support this, but I don't want to support and just say yes to the CRB without a little more information from about how we would handle this in other boards and commissions. We could create some other intentional problems by only doing one piece and the other without looking at the other ones as well.
Yeah, and I just want to let you know, I misspoke earlier when I said that we had scheduled to take action on this tonight. We're scheduled to take action on the 8th, but obviously that's not going to be enough time to have a discussion about all boards and commissions. But it does give us a little bit of extra time, so I wanted to clarify that. Sorry for misspeaking earlier. If nobody else asks, oh, go ahead, Councilmember Mana.
I would just say I'm okay waiting to take action on that piece till we have the holistic discussion, because I also think that we should think about it. Having been on the Planning Commission, there are a lot of meetings that they attend, and they sometimes go very late. So I think we should try and think about it holistically throughout the city. So I'm okay waiting until that discussion can happen.
Waiting on which part?
Waiting on adding a stipend for the CRB until we can have a discussion about all of the boards. I think that's what Councilmember Johnson was suggesting. Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Fowler?
Is that a straw poll?
Well, we're not.
Then we need a straw poll on this particular item, don't we?
We do.
Because
So-
I would propose a straw poll to support the addition of a honorarium of some sort, which I think we can be vague and define it later. So I would support an honorarium for members of the CRB and include a legislative intent to have a holistic discussion about boards and commissions throughout the city and honorariums in that way given to those boards and commissions.
Okay. Is there any questions or debate about the straw poll?
I would just want to make sure that we have that discussion prior to implementing the honorarium in this case.
You want to have a discussion prior to what?
Implementation of an honorarium. I can see us putting forward the straw poll, the support of it, and then it being written, and then we have to sort of see this unwritten on paper and say no to it potentially, or delay. I just want to make sure we're clear. We're not going to take, I don't want to take action on this particular honorarium without the context of the other ones. That's all.
Can I ask a question to Katie? If we pass this ordinance or the changes to the police civilian, the amendments to the ordinance, and then we, later have a discussion about honoraria, like, does it need to be in this ordinance, or could we have an ordinance that is like, here are the boards that get an honoraria, and here are the ones that don't, or whatever we decide to do?
Absolutely, Council Chair. So currently in City Code, there's a boards and commissions ordinance that applies to all the boards and commissions and talks about a quorum and appointment and sort of universal concepts. And so I can imagine a revision to that section of City Code talking about honoraria, and then you could piece out the boards that would be entitled to honoraria or the levels of honoraria that they could be entitled to. It does not have to be in this ordinance.
Okay. Well, we have a straw poll on the floor, which is Councilmember Fowler's. And then it sounds like, and the reason I asked this question is that if this straw poll doesn't pass, it sounds like there's an option to do an alternative. So I'll ask if people want to support this, and then if somebody wants to ask for another straw poll to support an ordinance like the one that Katie just described, then we can do that later. But I want to go ahead and move forward on Councilmember Fowler. So does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, go ahead and show whether you're supportive now or whether you're not supportive now of the honoraria.
I'm a little confused still, Mr. Chair, but I support this, but I prefer to put it in the other ordinance that he was talking about, rather than.
Then you should vote. Then you should vote no.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got a thumbs up from me and a thumbs up from Councilmember Fowler and a thumbs down from Councilmember Johnston, Mono, Dugan, and Rogers. So we'll go ahead and if one of the people who voted no, well, or yes, wants to do a straw poll now about the discussion, like Councilmember Johnston was saying, then please go ahead and make a straw poll.
Mr. Chair, I would propose a straw poll that we support support a study on honoraria and potentially amending the city ordinance on boards and commissions to include honoraria.
Anyone have a question about that? Okay, go ahead and indicate. So I have a thumbs up from myself, from Councilmember Fowler, Johnston, Dugan, Mono, and Rogers. That's unanimous with one absence. Okay, Allison, you want to take us to the next one?
I'll take you to the next one. The following items are issues that you could talk about today or put off until later. They are not directly related to ordinances, but they do include some potential budget requests and a legislative intent. Would you like me to go through all of them, or do council members want to just pick out the ones they prefer to talk about? There are 6 total.
Let's just go through them.
Okay. The
Okay.
first one, The first one is to provide an adequate workspace for panel discussions equipped for social distancing and to allow confidential body-worn camera footage to be shown to the group. So currently, there are some limitations about how board members can get together to look at the body-worn camera footage. And there are also concerns about the confidentiality and even internet limitations for sending these videos to board members in their homes. So the question here is whether the council would like to straw poll the idea of providing this adequate workspace or requesting the administration do so.
So this would be in addition to like a post-COVID world, if we ever get back to that, they would go back to what they did before, but this would be like in the interim?
My understanding is that this would be helpful in the longer term. Maybe Rick wants to speak to this.
Okay.
Yeah, this is definitely something when we meet face to face, which are better for the panels themselves. Currently, we meet on the first floor of the 349 building, also known as the new post office for the city. And when we need to look at video, they all come upstairs to my office and crowd in there, and we look at the video because my office is secure and I have to keep the IA videos secure. So it would be beneficial in the future that we had a place where we could meet that allowed us to have access both to social distancing and tech support to be able to display the videos when necessary.
And do you have any suggestions on where that space would be?
No.
Okay. Isn't there, okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would propose a straw poll to provide improved workspace for panel discussions, equipped for social distancing, and confidential police body-worn camera footage to be shown to the group. We can work out the details, but I think that's my intent. I'd like to see the improved options.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or debate about this? Okay. Mayor, would you like to weigh in on this or have Lisa weigh in on this from like a space standpoint, or are you okay? Do you have any objection to us moving forward with this?
It's nice of you to ask. I don't, and I don't know if Lisa wants to chime in.
Maybe Lisa's not here. Thought she was.
I'm here. I don't have anything to chime in about, and I apologize for that. I could do a little bit of work and get back to you though.
Yeah, I don't want to take the vote if you're like there's like literally no space left. So, or if you think that we can find a space somewhere, like if it's feasible to move forward today.
Yeah, I think it's feasible. I think we could probably find some space, but I'm not sure on how much space, and there's a lot I don't know right now. So, but I do think that we could accommodate something.
Okay. So, does anyone have any questions about the poll? Okay, go ahead and indicate your thoughts. See, Councilmember Johnston is a yes. Councilmember Mono, Dugan, Fowler, Rogers are yeses, and I'm a yes as well. That's unanimous with one absence, Councilmember Valdemoros. Okay.
Okay. The second additional item is a straw poll on expanding efforts to raise the public stature of the CRB by providing communication staff or the opportunity to contract with a private firm for this purpose. Essentially, council members in, I believe, all three of the different meetings talked about the importance of communicating with the public and the media about what the CRB does, but at the same time preserving the privacy, the security, and the impartiality of CRB members. So the goals would be to increase public confidence in the process, to ensure that the option to file a complaint against an officer or officers is widely known and understood, and to interest more city residents in serving on the CRB. CRB members believe that additional resources would be needed to expand the communications effort because of the administrator/investigators workload. So the question is whether the council would like to consider providing more resources to improve the communications effort of the CRB.
Don't we need a budget?
That is potentially the case. And so in the short term, what the council could do is a legislative intent or request to the administration to include this in an upcoming either budget amendment or the FY22 budget.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
These all seem like legislative intents to me, where we're just saying, yes, please look into it and come back. And if you come up with a great budget idea, let us know. And am I misreading that? Okay. So in that case, I would be in support of this legislative intent to the legislative intent number 2.
Okay, do you want to add in 3, 4, 5, and 6, or?
I think we can talk about them.
Okay, so just a legislative intent for number 2 right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
For some reason, this is sort of clicking in my head like the honorarium discussion about how many other boards and commissions could benefit from a similar sort of public relations standpoint. I don't know how many we would think about because we're opening up this large budget question now, but I can see a number of boards in my head right now who could really benefit from similar public engagement, awareness, and confidence.
Okay.
So part of me is thinking that this intent might not just be for this, it might be for other boards and commissions as well. And I'm also thinking that how do we leverage the resource for the greater benefit for a lot of places? Because I think we're talking about changes in the city. The CRB is one part, but we're going to be talking about for equity planning stuff and zoning and Human Rights Commission, obviously. There's a number of boards in my head that are really going to have to be a part of this discussion about equity, and could probably benefit from some support on this as well.
Okay, Councilmember Mono.
So I can only really speak from experience about the boards that I've been on, but with planning and with redevelopment advisory committee, they both had the staff members from planning or RDA to provide that public outreach. Whereas with the CRB, I can see how that's different. Like the police department staff, it's sort of an independent thing, and I can see why we wouldn't want the police department staff providing that. So I can see an argument for where CRB is very different than at least the ones that I've sat on. But I can't speak for all the boards in the city.
Okay, well, we have a straw poll pending. Sorry, Mayor Mendenhall, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer that Sandy in our office, if you could give us about a month or so, since you don't really have, it won't be back till January anyway, but we could quantify and try to put more of a formulaic approach together about the average amount of time and different things that you could consider about how to put together an appropriate honorarium for participants. We're totally open to doing that.
Okay, Councilmember Fowler.
Sorry, I was just thinking, and going back to what Darren just said about on the different boards that he's been on, that staff were there to help the board or the commission, and I think that's probably true. Because, I mean, that is true, because in this case, staff is there to help the CRB, and the staff is Rick. And so I think what we're looking at, I mean, is that there just may need to be more staff. I think probably the majority of board and commissions have a staff member that helps out with the board or commission. But in this case, it seems that the one staff just may need more help. So I go back to my original straw poll that we look at this straw poll number 2 of providing a communication staff or the opportunity to contract with a private firm for this purpose.
Yeah, and that's the straw poll that is out there. So if there are any more questions or discussion related to that straw poll, I don't see any. So let's go ahead and so this is just a legislative intent. Go ahead and indicate your, and I'm yes, Councilmember Fowler is yes, Dugan, Mono, Johnston, and Rogers are all thumbs up. So it's unanimous support with Councilmember Valdemoros absent. Okay, number 3, Allison.
Yes, number 3 is to request that the administration design a succession plan for the administrator investigator position. CRB members expressed concern about the potential for a significant loss of institutional knowledge that a personnel change could represent. So the idea is to work on a succession plan and potentially make sure that practices that could be useful to be formalized in CRB policy do exist in that policy.
So I see this one and number 4 as similar. So I would make a straw poll that we do that for both 3 and 4. Have a succession plan and have legislative intent for potential future ordinance changes regarding the CRB. So are there any questions or discussion to my proposed straw poll? Okay, let's go ahead and indicate whether you're for or against. Okay, I've got Councilmember Fowler, Dugan, Mono, Rogers, Johnson, and myself are all supportive, and Councilmember Valdemoros absent. Okay, number 5.
Okay, the final 2 may be more for discussion or again, legislative intent as Councilmember Fowler suggested. Number 5 was to schedule regular small group meetings for CRB members with council members. And a policy question for the council is whether you'd like to have our staff schedule these meetings at regular intervals, for example, annually.
Anyone have thoughts or questions on this?
I think annually seems like a long time between meetings. But is that overdoing it if you do quarterly? And is that just too cumbersome for meetings? But annually, I mean, we're basically going to do a review every year anyway, so why do we need a small group meeting? Whether it's quarterly, I would go rather for a quarterly or semi-annually than annually.
I think, Councilmember Dugan, that the idea here is the small group meetings with CRB members and that the review would be more of the policy recommendations of the CRB. So it would be a slightly different sort of meeting. This might be small group meetings with CRB members. Does that make sense?
So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I guess what I would suggest on this item, if there aren't further questions, is that just if council members want to do this, they can coordinate with staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the final item is whether to explore ways to encourage the district attorney office to speed rulings on Salt Lake City's officer-involved critical incident cases, as well as other cases with high public profiles. In the small group meetings, board members expressed some frustration that first, by law, they need to wait for the district attorney to rule on a case before they can take action on a related complaint. and the DA's office. As you know, sometimes the investigations do take a very long time. So the question is whether you'd like to discuss ways to do this, provide a legislative intent for someone on the administration to consider this. And I believe the city attorney's office may know something about some potential legislative actions on this issue.
Yeah, I was just going to say something that we've discussed as the legislative subcommittee, talking about a possible bill or something like that. So just so council members are aware, we've brought that up when in talking with legislators that represent Salt Lake, if there be any interest in pursuing something like this in state law. But Katie, do you want to give more information?
I don't have much to give. I think that there have just been some brainstorming discussions and probably ones that we can continue to have in the legislative subcommittee.
Okay.
Okay, well, those are all of the questions I have, unless someone wants to do something more formally with this number 6. Otherwise, I can follow up on all of these and let you know how it goes.
Yep, looks like that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Allison. Okay, we are now at item number 4, which is a comprehensive housing and planning petition briefing. So buckle in, everybody. We got 90 minutes set aside for this, and a lot of interest from the public on this item. So to start us off, we have Nick Tarbett, who, well, actually, we have Nick Tarbett from the council office, Blake Thomas, CAN director, Angela Price, policy and project manager for HAND, Sarah Javornik, senior planner, Susan Lundmark, project manager, and then we have a bunch of other people from CAN and other departments available for questions. So Nick, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a quick intro. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Today, the council will hold a briefing on a variety of planning petitions related to housing issues. City staff from community neighborhoods will brief the council on these petitions and related issues and talk about efforts to implement the goals and objectives in the city's housing plan growing in Salt Lake City. The purpose of this comprehensive briefing is to help place in context the many housing-related items and policy issues that will be considered in the coming months. The council, it's important to note, the council will not be taking any action on these at this meeting or tonight. Each item will have a future standalone briefing and a public hearing that the council will then consider taking action on. As you mentioned, we have 90 minutes set aside for the CAN staff will go through their presentation. Then afterwards, the council can ask any questions and have a discussion about these issues. With that, I will turn the time over to the administration.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And I've got my seatbelt buckled, so thanks for that preface.
Yes, make sure.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here today and to share with you a vision for the future of housing in Salt Lake City. I'd like to start by asking all of you a question. If you were looking to buy a home or rent a comfortable apartment in Salt Lake City, could you afford to live where you do today? For many of us, myself included, the answer might be no. Rising housing costs and flat wages have created significant challenges for individuals and families in every city neighborhood, leaving many of us priced out. We believe addressing this challenge lies in the complex interplay of policy, programs, and planning. We also know that, built over moments in time, our current constellation of policies has created opportunities for some and barriers for others. At the Department of Community and Neighborhoods, we pride ourselves in having no bias when we declare Salt Lake City the best city in the world. And we want to ensure that everyone who wants to make Salt Lake City their home has the opportunity to do so. And we know that's what our residents want too. 3 community surveys on housing have been conducted over the last 2 years. And the data shows us that only 4% of some 1,600 plus respondents believe that Salt Lake City's housing is affordable. 56% said that it isn't. That's a dramatic disparity. But we also found that 86% said they believe affordable housing would benefit our community and are open to a variety of types of housing, from single-family dwellings and duplexes to medium-density developments and tiny homes. The bottom line is this: our community is asking for and willing to accept more housing choice and affordability across the city. So today we're here to offer you a snapshot of the challenges and potential solutions we believe can help Salt Lake City move the needle on affordable housing in our community. The programs and the policies we believe can create greater equity and choice for our current and future residents. We request your feedback and questions, and we'll preserve ample time to dig in on any topic at the end of our presentation. Today, you'll be hearing from Angela Price in Housing and Neighborhood Development, Sarah Javoronic from Planning, and Susan Lundmark from Transportation. Lastly, I'd like to publicly share my appreciation for Ronnie Button from Civic Engagement and Brian Maya from Planning for turning our ideas into a beautifully designed slide deck with a short turnaround time. So if we could get that slide deck pulled up, we would appreciate that. And then I want to turn the time over to Angela Price to tee up our conversation with an overview of the values and principles that result in equitable and affordable cities. So if we could jump ahead a couple slides, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. It's great to be here with you today. As we prepared this presentation, we've been thinking about the changing needs of our growing capital city. The impact of the past 9 months is profound. 2020 has illuminated the inequities across the country and here in Salt Lake City. Breaking down the barriers that divide our great city is more important now than ever. We hear the challenges our residents are facing and are looking for positive and proactive solutions to ensure all who live here have choice. This graphic represents the many layers that build an equitable and holistic city. We understand the need for rapid adaptation to ensure long-term sustainability. Economic diversity, the driver of our city, is more important now than ever. Salt Lakers are asking for access to opportunity, for equitable transportation options, and housing for all income levels. We see these needs identified in public processes in community planning. We are faced with the challenge of addressing a rapidly growing city while preserving the unique character of our neighborhoods. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Sarah, Senior Planner in our Planning Division, to walk you through key data points that illustrate the need to act.
Thank you, Angela. Could you go ahead and go to slide 6? Couple more there. And one more. So thank you. In recent years, city plans, studies, news reports, and constituent feedback point to housing affordability in Salt Lake City and across the Wasatch Front as a growing concern. High rates of population and job growth underscore the urgency of the issue. Even during COVID-19, housing prices have continued to rise 10% this year. We want to begin by highlighting data that shows how much housing costs have increased for both rental and for sale properties. We'll also show zoning constraints that exist across the city and talk about hand projects and proposals that can address the housing challenges for our most vulnerable households. We'll follow that up with planning projects and amendments that aim to reduce per unit costs by streamlining the development process. We recognize the need for affordable housing and know there are many community concerns regarding overall housing affordability, given the rapid increases in rental rates and housing prices. Our goal today is to provide you with a holistic scope of the initiatives and proposals that together can address the housing challenges in our community. And we, of course, welcome questions and feedback from both the council and the community. Next slide. clarity, there are two types of affordability that we're talking about today. I like the definitions that we see here on the slide. Affordable housing is considered that housing that is restricted to families or individuals earning a specific amount of money with restricted rent. The second more broadly refers to the price of housing when compared to income. In responses to a recent affordable housing overlay survey, the indicated broad general support for affordable housing is defined on the slide. There is also agreement about the need for more housing for those who struggle with the cost versus income challenge. Next slide. Thanks. For example, this slide shows us how housing has become less affordable to renters. Rent, which is shown in orange, is increasing at rates that are higher than income growth, shown in blue. Rents went up by over 80% since 2000, while income grew by about 50%, which creates a significant cost burden for individuals and families. Next slide. Residents are cost burdened when more than 30% of their income goes to rent. This slide shows how much of a single person's income is needed to pay for the average apartment, and it's significantly more than the 30% that is recommended for those earning less than 80% AMI. At 80% AMI, a family of four can afford the average two-bedroom apartment for less than 30% of their income. They would become cost burdened, however, if their income dropped to 50% of AMI. The problem is even more dire for those earning 30% of AMI, and more than 50% of their income would go to rent. Next slide. Homeowners in Salt Lake City face similar challenges. Incomes, which are shown in light blue, have risen only about 60% since 2000, even though home values, which are shown in dark blue, the upper line on the graph, have nearly doubled over the past 20 years. Next slide. This is a dramatic increase that leaves many priced out of Salt Lake City. On the left, the typical housing value is shown, the lowest in yellow, increasing to the highest in red. We can see that the area in yellow that roughly corresponds with Glendale is the only place where those earning an average income can afford a home. In all other areas of the city, single-family homes are valued at more than $350,000. The graphic on the right shows the average annual change in home prices from 2011 through 2020, once prices started increasing after the recession. The highest increases are shown in red, with Glendale seeing the highest increases in prices over 10% per year. But other areas have seen significant price increases ranging from 6.6% in the avenues, shown in beige, to 9.6% in Rose Park. The highest increases have been in areas that were historically more affordable. Per a Kem Gardner Housing Affordability Report released in November, the situation is not limited to Salt Lake or Utah. Of the 100 largest metro areas in the country, the Salt Lake area ranks fourth in housing price increases since 2015, with a 55% increase. And Boise tops the list with an 84% increase. The Salt Lake area also has the 22nd highest median sales price at $372,000, according to a National Association of Realtors study of 183 metro areas. Next slide. So what does this mean for average households? The median household income was $56,370 in 2018. This has increased some over the past 2 years, but not at the same rate as housing prices. With an income of about $56,000, the median list price of a home was over 7 times income and the sold price over 8 times income. Looking at all housing, it was over 6 times the median income, up from 4.67 over 5 years. A multiple of over 5 times income is considered severely unaffordable. Next slide. What this means is that even in key industries in Salt Lake, employees earning the average starting wage cannot qualify for a home that's sold at median price. Even those earning more will have a difficult time finding housing options in the city. Next slide. What does this translate to for the future? This graphic illustrates the projected course if housing values increase at the same rate as the past 2 years. Home values are shown in dark blue with income shown in light blue. By 2030, the median housing price will be nearly double what it is today. The next slide. While there are many variables leading to this rise in prices, one that the city regulates is zoning. Zoning regulations control many aspects of land use in the city, including the location and type of housing that can be built. residential zoning in Salt Lake City has become more restrictive over time. In the city's first zoning ordinance, which was adopted in 1927, a two-family dwelling was permitted in all residential zones, and the minimum lot sizes, depending on the zone, were between 3,500 and 9,000 square feet. The less restrictive residential B zones permitted apartments and hotels, and there are many areas where it was mapped. This was the time period in which many of the existing homes in these older neighborhoods were constructed. Today, these same neighborhoods often only permit single-family or two-family homes. Over the years, these classifications grew more restrictive, with only closer-in neighborhoods, such as the lower avenues, allowing apartments. Later, many developing neighborhoods that were further from downtown and on both the east and the west sides only permitted single or two-family homes. It wasn't until 1995, when most of the city zoned R2 was rezoned to R1, that two-family dwellings were prohibited in much of the city. At the time, the median home price in Salt Lake County was roughly $115,000, and the median household income was about $40,000. That's a housing price to income ratio of just under 3. Next slide. One more. I think we might be missing one in there. Can you go back? I'm sorry. This one, yes, thanks. The challenge of more restrictive zoning is that it's compounded by the relatively small amount of land area in the city where residential development is permitted. It totals about 18% of land in the city. The gold-colored area is where housing is permitted. Much of this land is downtown and other commercial areas that may not have residential units as their primary use. Later, you'll be hearing about planning proposals to increase housing while balancing affordability, character, and compatibility of housing in these areas. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Angela to talk about potential comprehensive policy options.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd also like to thank Ben Becker with Zions Public Finance for the detailed data analysis that he conducted for us as we were putting together this presentation today. The CAN team will offer context for 11 different policy recommendations, each viewed through the lens of equity. Do you mind advancing the slide? Sorry. Keep going. One more. There we go. Thank you. I'm going to start with that sentence again. The CAN team will offer context for 11 different policy recommendations, each viewed through the lens of equity. These comprehensive policy solutions have either recently been approved by the City Council or represent a collective vision for moving the needle on housing disparities in Salt Lake City. We see equity as the foundation upon which all policy recommendations should be built. Equity creates the ability to have choice. Through our policy recommendations, we want to give Salt Lake City residents choice that is not based on gender, race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or religion. All residents should be able to choose where they live, where their children will go to school, and should have equitable transportation options. There should be choices that provide upward mobility and access to opportunities. Our residents must be able to breathe fresh air and have access to open space. To ensure the balance of equity the growing best practice is to create a 15-minute city. This concept means all your needs are met within a 15-minute walk from your home. As you will see, these policies require a collaborative approach through the many divisions that exist within CAN and throughout many Salt Lake City departments. Next slide. Growing SLC serves as the master plan and guiding vision for the policies we are putting before you today. Each policy recommendation is tied to a goal and objective as outlined in Growing SLC and seen here on the slide. I'm not going to go into details on all of these goals and objectives, but wanted to just illustrate that each one of these is tied to something outlined within the Growing SLC master plan. Due to the amount of content and for purposes of focusing this presentation today, I will not go into detail on Growing SLC, but rather utilize Growing SLC as the master plan and guiding document for the policy recommendations we are bringing before you. I would welcome the opportunity to come back to the council at your earliest convenience, if that is desired, to provide a comprehensive update on our progress, prioritization of remaining tasks, answer questions that arose during the annual reporting process, and share our vision for the comprehensive moderate income housing plan update slated to begin in 2021. Next slide, please. Housing loss mitigation, which will be referenced as HLM, is at the forefront of most housing conversations within the city. This ordinance could serve as a tool to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, slow down gentrification, and preserve the character of our neighborhoods. As we've studied this ordinance, it has become clear that there are many facets of HLM that need to be considered. While the loss of housing is certainly an issue, the displacement and gentrification of neighborhoods is the core of the problem. This is further complicated by the desire to ensure that residents are not living in substandard housing. The purpose of HLM is to mitigate the loss of affordable housing stock due to new development with due consideration for vested or protected property rights. The intent is truly to do no harm to the housing supply. An ordinance amendment was proposed and brought before the Planning Commission in March of 2019. The item was tabled for further consideration. Since then, HAND has met with community partners and convened an internal working group. I will get into more details on the purpose and current ordinance on the next slide. As currently drafted, the HLM ordinance does not meet its intended purpose or impact. The city is still losing housing units, specifically naturally occurring affordable housing, to remodels with no mitigation measures in place. Additionally, Chapter 18.9 of City Code, the Housing Relocation Assistance Program, does not have the structure necessary to yield relocation assistance for individuals being displaced by development. The ordinance focuses on displacement by city projects, which does not happen often, and the fee structure is nominal. A solid displacement ordinance in conjunction with a mitigation plan could serve as sound policy to preserving naturally occurring affordable housing. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you through 4 different factors within HLM and discuss the current ordinance, the issue with the ordinance, and proposed recommendations. The purpose of HLM is to mitigate the loss of affordable housing stock due to new development. The intent is truly to do no harm to the housing supply. The issue is the current ordinance does not preserve naturally occurring affordable housing that are being replaced by market rate units. There are no provisions in the ordinance that look at fair market rent versus affordable rents. One of the biggest factors in displacement is the rehabilitation of naturally occurring affordable housing units. This raises the rent and forces individuals out of the unit. A building rehab, for example, does not trigger HLM as the current ordinance is drafted. This makes it incredibly challenging for us to track the scope of the problem and to mitigate. Looking at Seattle as an example, the city could examine a performance or payment option that truly mitigates the impact of the loss of housing, not just through demolition, but all forms of housing loss. Additionally, a relocation program or displacement policy could be developed that would dovetail with the mitigation plan. The trigger for HLM currently is a demolition permit, a parking conditional use permit, or a zoning amendment for non-residential land that contains dwelling units. Currently, there are multiple touch points in the entitlement and development process. The current ordinance requires a mitigation plan for housing early in the process, and development may not actually occur, or development plans may change. As mentioned, one of the main reasons the city is losing naturally occurring affordable housing is due to units being remodeled. Oftentimes, a property owner will make minor cosmetic changes to a building that does not require a building permit, like paint and carpet, which makes it incredibly challenging to track the scope of loss. An ordinance amendment could consider a way to track and mitigate loss due to remodels. The administration is proposing the trigger for HLM should be a building permit application or land use amendment. One of the biggest issues with HLM is the current formula. It's based on appraised building value from the county assessor minus the International Code Council, or ICC, square foot replacement costs. Because the formula is based on assessed value rather than market value, it yields a negative result. This is tricky to modify because the assessed value is easy to access and is not disputable. If we used a different formula, we could potentially have developers disputing and appealing the value of the unit. Ken is recommending considering a formula that is based on tenant rent or construction costs to yield a result that is more reflective of current impact. Lastly, the process. Currently, an application is submitted to Building Services. Planning creates a mitigation report and sends the report to the Housing Advisory and Appeals Board. As the ordinance is drafted, there's no positive benefit to the city or our residents, and the process is cumbersome and confusing for developers. The administration is recommending centralizing the process within one division to simplify for developers. Additionally, this could be an administrative process with an appeal option rather than going to the Housing Advisory and Appeals Board. These are just some of the issues that have been identified by the administration. We recommend engaging a consultant to provide an analysis so we can understand the scope and depth of the loss of housing, specifically the preservation and renovation of naturally occurring affordable housing. Additionally, recommendations for a formula that is appropriate to the specific housing needs in Salt Lake City is needed. I will detail the proposed scope of services for a consultant later in the presentation. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Suze Lundmark in the Transportation Division.
Thanks, Angela. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, thanks. So I think, as many of you know, Transportation Division leadership and staff have been working to focus efforts on the connection between transportation and land use. We think that joining the two and finding the right balance can really help mitigate some of the negative impacts of development and growth for existing surrounding communities. And this can be especially true for more vulnerable or historically marginalized neighborhoods. For many households in Salt Lake City, transportation and housing costs are two of the highest expenses. This could be up to 70% of household income for some families. So we're working to invest in transportation infrastructure and services that help expand transportation options, so that hopefully being mobile is less costly for people in the city. Some of these investments include high quality and high frequency bus service. This includes regional service, as well as focusing on expanding our east-west service to help bridge some of the obstacles, like physical obstacles like the freeway and railroad that divide parts of the city. We're also really working to prioritize people through investments in walking and bicycle infrastructure. These are things like multi-use trails, crosswalk improvements, and separated bike lanes. And then creating vision type plans like the draft street and intersection typologies design guide, which is a long name. So I'm going to call it the Street Typologies Guide. And those are meant to help refocus the importance of streets as community spaces and assets that are sensitive to the context in terms of it matters where they are, and where all users, including people walking, bicycling, taking transit and driving, are welcome, comfortable, and safe. So many of the existing and proposed zoning ordinance are linked in some way to transportation or transit options. And we also recognize that transportation and active transportation investments can be seen by communities as a signal that a neighborhood either is or will soon undergo gentrification. And I don't think we want to suggest that increasing access to mobility options causes gentrification definitively. On the contrary, we think that having a variety of transportation options and helping to reduce overall cost burden can be part of the solution to some of the, to mitigating displacement and other negative impacts for gentrification. But we recognize and are sensitive to the issue and want to be part of the solution when it comes to equitable mobility efforts and how that connects to housing. So for our current status of some of our citywide projects, the Street Typologies Guide has wrapped up its second public comment period, and revisions are being made now, and a third and a final round will be out early next year. We have already begun implementing the recommendations from the 2017 Transit Master Plan. So that includes 5 new bus routes with increased frequency and or extended operating hours. And we're actively working on creating infrastructure for entirely new high frequency bus routes. And then the RFP for the Transportation Master Plan update is going to have a focus on equitable engagement and planning. And it's going to really have an emphasis also on the relationship between transportation and land use, like housing uses. And it's anticipated to be re-released in early 2021. So that is kind of the summary of transportation and how we think it connects with some of these housing issues. And I'll turn the time back over to Sarah to talk more about housing amendments.
Thank you. If we could go to the next slide. So first, I want to highlight several zoning amendments that the council has already approved or held hearings on. The first relates to ADUs. Changes to the ADU ordinance were adopted in 2018, expanding the areas where they can be built. And ADUs are seen as a way of providing additional units on existing single-family properties. The second is shared housing. The council has closed the public hearings for this proposal. Shared housing is considered one of the most affordable housing types, and increasing the areas where it can be built has the potential to provide housing for some of the city's lowest income residents. The third is RMF 30. The council has also closed the public hearings for modifications to the RMF 30 zone. This proposal is designed to increase the potential for additional housing and incentivize the preservation of existing housing. Currently, RMF 30 zoning regulations require lot or width areas and have density restrictions that make it difficult to construct multifamily housing despite it being a multifamily housing zone. And then the fourth is off-street parking. This has been transmitted to the council, but hearings have not been scheduled. As proposed, the amendments would change parking requirements, particularly in close-in areas or near transit, to reduce off-street parking. A reduction in parking requirements could decrease per unit construction costs and lead to more affordable units for residents. Next slide. Thank you. Planning staff has also prepared draft options for an affordable housing overlay that would provide incentives, including density bonuses or additional height when a percentage of a project's units are affordable. Staff has already gathered some public input on this proposal, and draft language is expected in early 2021. Under the proposal, affordable units would be restricted to 80% of area median income or lower, depending on the incentive. The intent is to provide opportunities for more affordable housing units across the city, with an emphasis on those areas that are close to high-frequency transit and other amenities. Next slide, please. The proposal for adaptive reuse zoning amendments is in the developmental stages, but the intent will be to increase opportunities for the adaptive reuse of buildings by modifying zoning requirements that are difficult for existing buildings to meet. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Angela to talk about the timeline moving forward. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm turning it back over to Blake to talk about the timeline moving forward.
Thanks. Next slide, please. And one more, please. Thanks. So this timeline graphic illustrates the different programs, policies, and solutions that the mayor and her team or the administration are currently working on to address the housing crisis. This represents a coordinated effort from the administration working with City Council to ensure that these policy recommendations are moving forward in a meaningful and timely way, with the recognition that the ultimate direction and funding comes from you, the City Council. We did not quantify with an estimated date in an effort to not put the cart before the horse, but you can see it as the administration's intent to accomplish all the included items throughout 2021. I don't intend to touch on each item right now, but I'd like to highlight a few key points. One, which is accomplished under 2020, is the demolition ordinance. And as far as the legislative intent that was recently passed, the Building Services Division has cataloged approximately 150 applicable properties. And based on council direction, our capital asset and real estate services team could explore purchasing these nuisance properties, which might serve as a city investment for future affordable housing development. We and the Housing and Neighborhood Development Division are working on an RFQ for a housing loss mitigation and gentrification study, which Angela will go into a little more detail in a moment. And we hope to release that by the beginning of January. There's several key planning initiatives that you can see on this timeline. Some are already before City Council, such as RMF 30 and shared housing, and others we intend to bring forward in 2021, such as the affordable housing overlay, for example. The launch of the Transportation Master Plan in 2021. That will be critical in ensuring equitable transportation options for the city. And Susan did an excellent job of pointing out the nexus to housing. Growing SLC, our moderate income housing plan, expires in 2022. It was a 5-year plan. So our team plans to go to bid to hire a consultant for this project, and we'll launch the rewrite in the latter part of the year. And then lastly, this graphic illustrates the interplay between all of these policies, the work that's happening in our department, and the importance of each one of these policies moving forward to achieve this collective vision. Absent a silver bullet solution, each policy can be viewed as a spoke on a wheel that keeps the wheel moving forward. A couple more slides ahead, please, and I'll turn it over to Angela. Thanks.
Thanks, Blake. I'm going to frame the conversation about what we think a gentrification study could look like by talking about Salt Lake City's community fabric. Each item listed on the graphic becomes its own thread that together weave the fabric of our city. You will see the opportunity for choice, such as having community gathering places and art, open space, environmental justice, and economic stability. These choices come together with the collective vision and comprehensive policy recommendations to form the fabric of an equitable city. We are hearing from our residents and community partners the importance that choice and equity have in our policy solutions. We see the disproportionate impact to individuals' health, safety, and well-being based on where they live, the color of their skin, and their socioeconomic status. The disparities are prevalent in evictions, local business closures, transportation costs, environmental conditions, and layoffs. These disparities are magnified more now than ever with high COVID numbers on the West Side and the increased death rate in our friends of color. The need for community resiliency and the importance of being housing secure is imperative and critical in one's ability to bounce back from natural disasters, pandemics, recessions, and climate change. This year has illuminated the need for change, sustainability, and resiliency as our communities have taken to the street. This council and administration have placed breaking down these barriers and healing our community at the forefront of your agenda. The work CAN does will serve as a catalyst to bring the collective policy together for an equitable Salt Lake City. Next slide, please. As you've seen, gentrification includes many different policies that we talked about today, including displacement, relocation, and housing loss mitigation. We will be going to RFQ in January to hire a consultant to look holistically at the gentrifying factors in the city. The administration will be using the $100,000 that was appropriated on April 7th of 2020 in the mayor's recommended budget to fund the consultant team. We know we have 2 codified ordinances that need amendments, 18.97 Housing Loss Mitigation and 18.99 Housing Relocation Assistance Program. The administration reviewed the possibility of a stopgap measure for HLM and relocation, but due to the nature, complexity, and the challenges with the fee structure, it was determined that the comprehensive study would be the more streamlined approach. We understand these safety nets are needed to complement land use amendments, city infrastructure investment, and development pressure. The administration appreciates the collaborative partnership with the City Council and the ability to move forward on policy recommendations in a productive manner. CAN is seeking a consultant to look at these issues from a global perspective with an outside entity that is trusted by the community. This consultant team will examine the 2 competing interests of urban revitalization and gentrification and provide concrete solutions to address the identified needs. We know some of the problems and potential solutions, but need the consultant to help us identify what we don't know through public engagement and data analysis. We envision a hands-on approach by the administration, a thorough community engagement process to understand the scope, breadth, and depth of the problem. This is critical in truly addressing the needs and having a plan that is built for and embraced by the community. Data analysis will help us understand areas of opportunity and where gentrification pressure and risk of involuntary displacement is greatest. We anticipate policy and programmatic changes that are needed to immediately address the identified issues. in addition to long-term goals and objectives. These are some of the factors that we recommend be included in the scope of services, but certainly welcome feedback from the council on additional needs and priorities. Our intent today is to give you something to digest and react to, then have further discussion if needed. Some of the components that we're considering in the scope of services are there city policies, practices, and investments that could be exacerbating the problem? What is the pathway forward that fosters urban revitalization and land use intensity while preserving our quality of life and our core values? What is the true loss of naturally occurring affordable housing, and what tools can be used to preserve housing options for low-income renters? How can we provide for housing choice and overcome the affordable housing barriers like high land value and high construction costs? Our anti-displacement policies like tenants' first right of refusal or a relocation program better suited for the needs in Salt Lake City? Is inclusionary zoning one of the spokes on the wheel? Can we develop a risk assessment and quantifiable metric to identify neighborhoods that are ripe for displacement and opportunities for mitigation? What tools will provide access to opportunity, and does the opportunity index need refinement? What are best or emerging practices that can be impactful in Salt Lake City? We would like the consultant to look at immediate needs, but also help shape goals and objectives for the long-term collective vision. It is the administration's intent to put out an RFQ by January, as this study is a critical component to ensuring the housing crisis is not exacerbated by additional loss of housing units. With that, I'm going to turn the time back to Sarah to talk about potential planning amendments and impact.
Thank you, Angela. Could you go to the next slide, please? So planning staff also anticipates a number of additional potential amendments that could result in more housing opportunities. These are loosely organized on the slide by housing type. Under consideration are increases to building heights in areas of the downtown, zoning changes in the granary, and potential changes to the zoning around the ballpark and 2100 South track stations. It is anticipated that these changes would allow for additional height, building types, or otherwise provide for the construction of more affordable units. Also under consideration is the adoption of the Life on State plan that envisions zoning that would allow for more residential units. Additionally, amendments to the RMF 35 and RMF 45 zones are also under consideration. These have many of the same issues as the RMF 30 zone. The regulations, lot area, width, and density requirements make it difficult to construct multifamily housing. When it can be constructed due to the density restrictions, it is often large, expensive townhome style development. Amending current regulations could result in projects with a greater number of units that are potentially more affordable. As we have said, over time, residential zoning in Salt Lake has grown more restrictive. Amendments to existing zoning regulations could allow for additional housing types, including duplexes, townhouses, or small apartments that often already exist in many neighborhoods because they were originally permitted. The adoption of the ADU ordinance in 2018 required annual reports. A number of barriers to their construction have been identified, including barriers relating to zoning restrictions like conditional use permits, as well as building and fire code requirements and financing, which is not regulated by the city. Reconsideration of these regulations could add housing to many neighborhoods and simplify the development process for others. So now I'm going to give the floor, so to speak, to Blake for your questions and further discussion.
Thank you for your attention. We greatly appreciate it, for the opportunity to talk about housing in a holistic way and how all these various pieces tie together. So as promised, we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And we have our presenters available, as well as our division directors in housing and planning.
Mr. Chair, are we doing questions? You're muted, sir.
And I'm muted. Thank you. Sorry about that. Questions? Councilmember Johnston, go ahead.
I'm going back to one of the first slides in your deck, the single-family house types, annual change and typical cost, typical values. I can't see a slide number, sorry.
Is it the one with the maps on it?
Increase in home values.
Okay, slide 11.
Yeah. My question is sort of two. One is, what is the goal? If we were to say, what is the goal for housing in the city? Because I'm going to leave that sitting there for a second because it's a big question that's complex, obviously. But looking at this, what I'm looking at essentially is single family home values, right? I live in Glendale. It's yellow. That means the average, the typical home value, which is average. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Is below 300,000. If I go to the red, which is just, at least in the Avenue section, east of I-15, and up by the University of Utah, it is double that, right? Over 600,000 for average. So twice as expensive, same size homes in general, I'm guessing, for the most part, but not all, twice as expensive. Is this a problem, or is this sort of accepted and we just want to make sure that there's some affordability on average across the city?
Councilmember Johnston, thank you for that question. I think one of the biggest concerns is the disparity as far as the housing costs versus the average income and that imbalance. So I would like to defer to Lonnie and Nick as far as I know they have some thoughts about this spread, and we'll give them the floor, but I do see this as an issue as far as the trend lines that we presented and how many people can make Salt Lake City home that want to.
Yeah. So I think when you talk about the goal, Plan Salt Lake identifies as one of the goals providing accessible housing in all parts of the city for everybody. So if you look into that goal and start thinking about what it means, is that it really does mean having housing options in all of the neighborhoods, despite the disparity in housing costs. We know that we're always going to have some neighborhoods, and every city has some neighborhoods that are more expensive than other neighborhoods. And at the time when that goal was created, it was partly to put more housing in areas that had higher access to opportunity, which in Salt Lake, if you look at the opportunity index, it trends on the higher ends on the east side to the lower ends on the west side. And so providing more housing options on the eastern neighborhoods is one of the targets of Plan Salt Lake.
The reason I asked that question is because this is hard. There's a lot of recommendations in here that I would endorse. I think there's good things in here. I'm concerned that they still tilt the field because if you look at most of our work, it hasn't followed these patterns. Our mass transit follows the lower income areas, generally speaking, outside of Sugar House and the 4 South corridor. And so when we look at sort of what we're doing, we tend to sort of say the transportation options demand we have higher density housing, more accessible affordability, but we don't touch areas of the city that are out of our own expense. And that's my concern, is that I know we can't control it all, but if we're not very clear that we have to be inclusionary, and I say inclusionary zoning is not a silver bullet, but if we're not demanding that everywhere, I don't know the incentives are enough. I think that when we look at displacement, and if we say, all right, you have the option to keep people in their housing by upgrading it and retaining that affordability, or you can help them relocate, you know exactly where they're going to relocate to. They're going to relocate to the accessible housing, which is going to be on the tracks line and going west. It's not going to be going east because we're not planning to build anything east. So I'm struggling with that right now, that almost tacitly it feels a little bit like we're accepting. this. As long as we have on average, folks have a place to live somewhere in the city. And I'm not saying this, I get it, but it feels a little bit like, I'm not sure this is going to be addressed. I don't know that it can, but it's a little frustrating right now looking at the current proposals with the shared housing, the RMF 30 without the loss mitigation plan, and without an inclusionary zoning concept. I'm worrying that we're not actually going to make a lot of headway on the stuff we need to do as far as geographic equity. Just voicing that concern out up front with everyone.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Milano.
Yeah, I'm also really concerned by these two slides. I think actually the other slide is what's concerning me, is that the areas in the city, the West Side neighborhoods that do currently have more affordable housing, those are the ones that are increasing the most. So even though we're not equitable across the city with housing prices in any way, and I know I agree with what Nick said, is that every city has more expensive and less expensive neighborhoods, but it's pretty stark if you look at this slide, and the areas that currently are now affordable are becoming unaffordable. Those are the areas that are having the highest rate of increase in prices, which that's what's scaring me, is that I think on a citywide perspective, if the parts where we do have currently affordable housing are increasing the most, we have an even bigger problem on our hands. And I also agree with Councilmember Johnson that inclusionary zoning is probably something we have to look at maybe sooner than later. I think that that's the only way to force or to guarantee some level of affordability throughout the city. That's the only way that and I know that the affordable housing overlay zone is kind of doing that with a more of an incentive base, and I'm hopeful that that will work, but I wonder if we can do it with a more of a requirement as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Mono. I appreciate your comments, and Councilmember Johnston. Did you want a response from Nick Norris in terms of the your inclusionary zoning comments?
Sure.
I would like to hear one.
Okay.
We're talking about inclusionary zoning. So.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back on this slide, because I think, Councilman Romano, I think you're absolutely correct. The concerning thing is that big red number on the west side, because that is an early sign that that neighborhood is starting to gentrify. And it's starting to gentrify because the lighter shade colors on the right side of that picture do not have the housing options for even the people who can afford to live there. And so what they're doing is, and this can be tracked over time, that their investment of purchasing a home, in this case, is moving further west. And so it is starting to displace those people who don't have the options that people with higher incomes have. And I think you're absolutely right. That, and I don't really want to sound too alarmist, but that should be a canary in the coal mine for our housing affordability. And if we don't do something about it, we are going to see significant negative impacts to those neighborhoods that right now are our most diverse, our most racially and ethnic diverse, and some of the only places that a lot of our workers can afford to live. And so we're going to lose that without changes on the east side. And so I agree that inclusionary zoning has to be part of the solution, but so does expanding where housing can be built outside of the areas where we're currently seeing it built. We can't rely on just our transit corridors. We can't rely on just Sugar House area. We can't allow or rely on the 400 West corridor. We're going to have more places where we have to have more housing and more housing types.
Councilmember Dugan.
I like the discussion here, but part about housing is if you don't have that transportation done first, then the housing is put up without anybody being able to get to work. So it has to be, you know, together. And if you don't have that transportation first portion there funded and planned and in place, then the housing doesn't do us a lot of good because no one can get to work.
We agree. John Larson, I know you're on this call, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but if you're in earshot, I'd welcome some of your thoughts as it relates to that issue that Councilmember Dugan has brought up.
Sure. Yeah, happy to just share a couple thoughts. My internet connection's been bad today, so I apologize if I break up a little bit. I would say, you know, this discussion just further motivates me to on the implementation of the frequent transit network. Most of the east stops.
Okay, John, if you can breaking up, if you don't mind.
21st south to 21st east.
Okay, John, could you?
They're out the ends at the U. The 10th north route.
John, could you cut?
Park will actually go up South Temple end at the U. The route 4. I'm sorry. Does that help at all?
So far, it was better.
I apologize for the bad connection.
Okay, that sounded good.
Okay. We have many routes along 21st East, Foothill Drive, the new we're calling it Route 1 that starts on in Goal. So I think there's a lot of to invest along the frequent transit network.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, we can put some of those thoughts in a memo if you'd like.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't see any. Okay, great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. I have one. Oh, Councilmember Mono, go ahead.
Sorry, I was late with that. I agree that transportation is really important. We need to have that as part of the solution. I'm really glad that it was included in this discussion today. I do think though that housing is such an urgent need and transportation is such a big lift to create that I'm not comfortable saying we're going to not create more housing until we have significant improvements to our transportation network, because I feel like that's a several year process and we don't have several years to wait on housing, at least in my opinion. So yes, I agree with Councilmember Dugan that transportation is absolutely critical to creating a functioning city and a better Salt Lake City, but I don't think we can wait for that to be in place before we create more housing options.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers.
Mine's more of state the obvious, but I'm really impressed with the graphics that we've got on this whole presentation. You know, this is a I'll just try to use my voice of Kyle Malta. He loved graphics so much, and he loved the bubble charts and loved everything about it. And I just have to be, he would be so impressed with this that I had to say something. So kudos to the entire department and looking at these 11 policy options that we have going forward. But I hate to state the obvious, and that is that we really can't do anything unless we own the property. If we're trying to keep it so people are not gentrifying areas, then we should go in there and be looking at purchasing these properties in order to make sure that these neighborhoods aren't turning. I mean, if you look at, we talk about transportation on the west side, we're funding huge bus routes over there. You know, we're making infrastructure improvements, and to say that we're making these things and it's turning, it is, but it's also creating access to opportunities for our neighborhoods too. So you know, in the RDA, we have the Northwest Quadrant housing money coming our way, and that's one way that we can look at, you know, keeping it so we have affordability in areas. But, you know, I'm all looking and discussing inclusionary zoning. I know that's a hot topic that we need to look for on the east side specifically. But if we're looking at investment wise, there's no bigger bang for our buck than making sure that we own the property in perpetuity, and making sure that we're in control of our own destiny, which is affordability.
Council Chair, may I interject one thing? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something along the lines of what Councilmember Rogers has said. Yesterday, there was a great presentation that was sponsored by the Utah League of Cities and Towns about public assets. And I'd be happy to share a little bit more about that. But the crux is that we need to make sure we are working with partners, whether they're philanthropic or other partners, to make sure that we are leveraging the billions of dollars of potential for city or county or other land ownership to make sure that we are maximizing the possibilities. So,
yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. And that, just to follow up, is, you know, when we look at the fleet block, that's another one that we're talking about where we can make a huge impact with just the right type of policy guidance and looking for, you know, affordability and creating opportunities there too. So it's the destiny is in our own hands, and with the properties that we own, making sure that we can do it.
My question is, what is the timeline for that housing loss mitigation ordinance?
So we hope to go out to, oh, Lonnie, do you want to take that? Sorry, I saw you on mute.
It's okay. I want to just make sure I reiterate that we're working towards utilization of the $100,000 that the council appropriated towards the gentrification study. We hope to be able to have an RFP out in January. It takes us a little more time. If we were, you know, in the private sector, we might be able to make this move in a couple of weeks, but realistically, at least 6 to 8 weeks to get that going. We feel like we need to have the consultant, as Angela described, to participate with us on the things that we understand and the things that we don't understand. And so then if we come to a realization that we need a major rewrite, which I think we are identifying that that's necessary, it's a lengthier process. 6 to 8 to 9 months is kind of a optimistic. I can see Nick Norris kind of maybe thinking that's really optimistic, Lonnie. But it's a long time. But we definitely are focused on this, and we want to make sure that we are moving as quickly as we can.
Councilmember Johnston.
I would just reiterate that if we're at a tipping point for price, and it continues to escalate, the incentives are great, but they're probably not going to be as effective. I'm worried that where are we at with the inclusionary zoning discussions or things along those lines? Are we having those discussions, I guess, on a policy level?
We really aren't. So one of the things that we know is coming out of the survey that we did for the affordable housing overlay is that in some parts of the city, inclusionary zoning is going to be the only option. It's not going, either the development potential is already so great, or it's greater than what is than the market can provide. And so we we recognize that that's probably going to be the only avenue in some parts of the city. And so I think we're just barely identifying that. And as we work through that affordable housing overlay, it very well could be that one of those outcomes from that is an inclusionary zoning included in that process.
So I guess, Mr. Chair, my concern is that I support, in theory, I support the RMF 30 change, the housing loss mitigation concept moving forward, the overlay, et cetera. I'm still deeply, deeply concerned that without that loss mitigation ordinance and something along the lines with inclusionary zoning, we are not going to make headway. And I'm very concerned. And I understand the canary in the coal line concept with this, but 10% increase on a $300,000 house is nowhere close to a 7.5% or 8% increase on a $600,000 to $900,000 house. And as long as that's happening, the escalation in cost going east is going to far outweigh the incentives we can offer. And we're going to get deeper and deeper in the hole. And we're not going to catch up, because what we're going to do is we're going to offset with infill on places that have infill, which is along areas that are still cheap. And so we're still going to consolidate affordability in little areas. And I'm all for affordability on the west side, frankly. I'll support it. But it's not going to lead to equity across the city. And so that's where I'm concerned about. Without those two other things quicker in the pipeline and getting moving, we're going to pass this now, and we may lose 3 years with these other ordinances before we get caught up. And I don't know how to make it quicker, frankly. I don't have the answers. I'm sorry. I'm willing to put money towards it. That's my concern going forward on the current proposals in the next few weeks.
Mayor, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I hope that what you've heard today shows you that there's not a reluctance on part of the administration on exploring and bringing to the council a proposal for inclusionary zoning. You heard from Blake's team is around trying to do in a strategic approach using the data from the community and from the economy that's happening to do it as effectively as possible. And I mean that also with regard to the state legislature. So if there is interest with the majority of the council to shift those priorities, I mean, this is I've made a case to the council already this year with other departments and planning that there are staffing resources that are needed for us to elevate certain things while continuing the workload. And I'm not here with a proposal today, but I will say that in order for planning to be able and can in many ways to be able to go ahead with these kind of advanced pieces of work, we'll be happy to bring you some proposals to make sure the staff is available to do that.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Chair, may I ask another question?
Go ahead.
So we discussed, I think, at the beginning of the year about increasing staffing for planning in particular, but there are other areas it sounds like it could be useful if we can. But we were told that that wasn't necessary based on some other changes. There'd be enough time freed up. Is that different now in your view, or is it the same?
Sorry, council member, ask me again.
Brought up in the last budget discussion about increasing staff for planning particularly. It sounds like CAN perhaps needs some more, whoever else, but we were told that it wasn't necessary right now, that there were some changes in process that would free up enough time to be able to sort of handle increased workload in some capacity. It sounds like we need more staff though. Is that?
Yeah, and I'm going to let Blake speak to the changes in process, but I want to mention that there's HUD funding for us to hire temporary staff in hand. It would go a long ways for us on this very timeline, but it's not finding traction with the council at the moment. So it would be fantastic to get that HUD funding that's available right now on the temporary staff. But I'll let Blake speak to the rest of the process.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I think Nick and the planning team, as you've seen before with some of the proposed exception amendments. I really appreciate the planning team for being so creative where their workload has increased, but the staffing hasn't followed that trend. It's kind of like income and housing prices, I guess, for a recent image. And I'm grateful for Nick and the team for saying, here are some of these tasks that we might be able to streamline and get more with what we have. So I'm grateful for that approach first, rather than the reaching out for increased staff immediately. But it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't say that Nick and team, and also as I've gotten my bearings, I know that the housing and neighborhood development team have had a difficult time with weighing the tasks that are in front of them with the hiring freeze vacancies and a desire to do some of the more forward-looking housing loss mitigation efforts or with planning inclusionary zoning. So I think that would be a boon to help with some of these urgent issues that, absent of consulting money, just sometimes they fall down in the priority queue as it relates to the day-to-day duties. So, and as the mayor mentioned, I know, it would be a boon to have temporary additional support for the 7.1 million that we've just received, so that Lonnie's team can be working on housing loss mitigation efforts and other things. So I appreciate your question, and just would love to have those discussions.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Cindy Gus Jensen.
Just checking in, the mayor mentioned the staffing addition was not finding traction with the council. We did, as staff, inquire about it because it was characterized as helping to manage the funding, and it was 3 FTEs. And I think that Blake I think it was withdrawn for now, but we didn't at that time have a conversation about housing loss mitigation or any of these other things. I wonder if we need to revisit that and get some more current information from the administration about it, because we were working with Blake on what are the ways where they could have temporary staff and things like that so that they weren't on the payroll and then later have to be removed from city employment. So those were the things we were struggling with. But I think we probably need to get more information from the administration if it's a concern, as the mayor indicated.
Thank you. And I think there's just, to the point of housing loss mitigation, I think there's the cascading effect where Lonnie's team, absent of additional support for new money, would have to stretch further and take on new tasks, while the others, such as housing loss mitigation, oftentimes would be pushed back absent that additional support. So Cindy Gus Jensen, I appreciate you for bringing up that context, and I know we'd be amenable to whatever the council desires as it relates to, even if it's not tethered to 3 FTEs, but a lump amount that's allowable with HUD and running through a temp agency or whatever gets everyone comfortable about the continuity of those positions, and that when the funds expire, the positions cease.
So I don't remember if you gave us a memo or could you give us a memo so the council has the most current information about what works, so that we can just get that out to them, because I think right now we're in a little bit of limbo.
Okay, yeah, we would love to do that. We'll get right on that. Thank you.
So am I to understand we're going to wait to hear back from you, Blake, about the staffing needs? Is that accurate?
Sure thing. I'm happy to put that together in a memo. and get that to you as soon as possible. So there's a, if you're amenable to it, what I'd love to do is kind of lay out some of the things that have been presented today that we think are a part of that package of solutions, and put whether that's a outside consultant or internal need around that, to then have it in your court to say, here's what we prioritize or want, if you're amenable to that process.
Because I think we have a budget opening still open, and I think that based on our conversation, we set aside that topic. So now we need to bring it back into the conversation. Is that, Jennifer, help me, is that where we are?
Yes, there is a follow-up discussion on budget amendment number 5 that was tentatively scheduled for tonight, but we didn't have any follow-up questions. We could absolutely kind of hold action on that item till next week. I think action on some of budget amendment number 5 was anticipated tonight, but I think we could absolutely use that follow-up information and act on that item next week.
Okay. So we're still in good time for the council to receive that.
Yeah, and Chair and Executive Director, please know I'm deeply motivated by the potential to have that discussion. I know it would be a welcome holiday gift for some of the divisions and the growing workloads in CAN. I know 2020 has been a trying year for everyone, but being able to do some of these things that we've presented today in a timely manner would be such a exciting gift.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I think if we can get that updated memo, then and we can schedule more time on the 8th. So thank you. Other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions on this item, we are at agenda item number 5, which is a tentative break. We also do have a, let's see, oh yeah, so we'll go ahead and do a 20-minute break, and so everyone just meet back here at 10 after. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to this week's episode of Capital City News. We hope you're taking care and staying safe. If you're looking for ways to give back to the community, specifically to those who have been impacted heavily by COVID-19, check out Salt Lake City's Raise Up SLC fundraiser. To learn more, visit raiseupslc.com, or you can text Give SLC to 21000. On this week's episode of Capital City News, we hear from Salt Lake City Council Chair Chris Wharton about zero-based budgeting and what that means for residents of the city. And our History Minute is about President-elect Joe Biden and his visit to the city for the Cancer Moonshot. Let's get started with our legislative update and look back.
At its November 17th meeting, the City Council received an informational update on local emergencies, including COVID-19, as well as updates on efforts to help those experiencing homelessness and efforts related to racial equity in policing, discussed an amendment to the city's budget, adopted a ceremonial resolution with the mayor declaring November 20th as Transgender Day of Remembrance in Salt Lake City, and December 1st as World AIDS Day. and heard from the public on a variety of issues. To learn more, visit slc.gov/council.
A virtual community conversation on the rising rate of hate crimes in the United States and Utah was held in partnership with the Salt Lake City Mayor's Office, the Salt Lake City Public Library, the United Jewish Federation of Utah, and their partners against hate. This timely panel discussion was the second virtual event in the Community Conversation series, where leaders in national organizations joined together to address critical questions about the growing epidemic of hate crimes and hate incidents. Panelists also shared ways to report, advocate for policy, and help create understanding and awareness to try and prevent hate crimes from happening in and around the country.
I'm grateful for you as leaders in this work. Our commitment is to never stop working against bias, hate, and racism in our community. In Salt Lake City, there is no place for hate.
Shop safe, shop small, shop local. The holiday season is upon us, and now more than ever, local businesses need your support. COVID-19 has made for a challenging year, but businesses are working to keep their customers safe by offering unique services like online ordering, curbside pickup, shopping by appointment, and more. As you're thinking about creative and unique gifts for your loved ones, consider shopping locally or supporting a small business. For every dollar spent locally, more than half comes right back to growing Salt Lake City's local tax base. Help strengthen our economy. To learn more, visit localfirst.org. Salt Lake City is conducting its first zero-based budgeting exercise, a process to review the Salt Lake City Police Department's budget. Council Chair Chris Wharton shares details on the process, what this means for residents and racial equity, and next steps.
The mayor and city council are in the middle of a multi-pronged effort to improve accountability, equity, and transparency in policing. It began this summer as city leaders built the annual budget with these goals in mind. One of the steps the council put into motion was an audit of the police department budget, followed by a process called zero-based budgeting, which is an exercise that examines police budget from the ground up. And with us is the chair of the council, who also represents the city's 3rd district, Chris Wharton. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us what role this audit plays in the process that you're working on?
This audit is going to help us as council members determine on a very specific and detailed level exactly where taxpayer money is being spent on police resources, and how that money is allocated, how it's used, where the areas that are being funded, what isn't being funded, and it just gives us a much more detailed view of the inner workings of the department. So we will take that information and use it to inform the city's first zero-based budget exercise.
At what stage is this audit in at this point?
So we have just finalized or are finalizing who are going to be the auditors for this, and then the audit will begin immediately thereafter. We're hoping to get started later this month.
Can you talk more about zero-based budgeting in general and how it's going to help in this specific process?
Sure. So zero-based budgeting is a little bit different than the way we typically do budgets. We typically do a base budget where a department will come to us and say, this is what you have given us in the past, this is what we anticipate our needs will be for this year, and this is why we're asking for this amount for this year. And a lot of the discussion really focuses on the difference between what the department currently has and what they're asking for moving forward. A zero-based budget starts with the premise that the department has $0, and then you slowly add on top of that all of the things that the department needs, and so it allows the council to really scrutinize that money and make sure that that we're accounting for every dollar that's being spent. And it allows us as council members to have more visibility on the inner workings of the department and to make decisions regarding funding that reflect the values and the goals of the city.
Can you talk to us about those goals, especially in this process with zero-based budgeting for the police department? What are those goals?
What we've heard from the public, a huge outcry from the public in this last year, is that they want more transparency and accountability from the police department. They want to know what exactly the police are doing, what resources they're using, and how are police officers held accountable to the public. And a lot of that comes down to like other areas that are outside the budget, but a lot of it is really tied to what the budgetary resources of the department are. So that's why it's really particularly relevant to this zero-based budgeting exercise.
Can you talk about what the next steps are for this?
Yeah, so once the auditor is finalized, they will work with council staff and administrative staff and the police department to go through all of their just the daily operations of the department and find out where and how money is being allocated to meet those operations. And then they'll make recommendations about whether or not they think that funding is adequate or whether funding is being used for what its intended allocation was for. And then the council can make decisions based on that about what adjustments to make to the budget going forward.
For residents of Salt Lake City who want to keep an eye on this process and maybe have their voices heard further down the line, where do they go to do that? Where do they go to keep an eye on this?
Yes, absolutely. And we hope that they will. They can go to slccouncil.com. That's the city council's website. And we'll be posting information there about updates regarding policing and equity. And we'll of course have our public discussions in all of our city council work sessions and formal meetings. They can also follow what the city's doing through the Commission on Racial Equity and Policing. We hope that group will also have input on this process moving forward. And the time when it's really going to start to, where we're going to really want to hear input from residents is at the start of budget season, which it will be in the spring of 2021. Usually kind of those discussions start around April or May and carry on into June. That's when we have to finalize the budget.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for bringing this issue to the public's attention.
And now it's time for our History Minute.
In his final State of the Union address in 2016, President Barack Obama tasked his vice president with what he called a moonshot to cure cancer. By February 1st, 2016, Vice President Joe Biden had convened his first meeting of the Cancer Moonshot Task Force, hoping to establish a roadmap to curing cancer in the world. Over the course of the rest of the year, Vice President Biden brought together an unprecedented number of cancer researchers, hospitals, survivors, and stakeholders to help chart that course. No fact-finding mission to cure cancer would be complete without a trip to Salt Lake City to hear from those at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And on February 29, 2016, Vice President Biden landed in Salt Lake City to do just that. Accompanied by Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, the Vice President toured the facilities and hosted a roundtable discussion with the administrators to see what could be done to envision a future without cancer. In October of 2016, Vice President Biden delivered his report, and then in December of 2016, Congress passed the 21st Century Cures Act, authorizing $1.8 billion in funding for the Cancer Moonshot over 7 years. While cancer is not yet cured, local researchers like the Huntsman Cancer Institute continue their work to stop it. And in November of 2020, Joe Biden was elected to be the 46th President of the United States, vowing to continue the government's work on this project.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode. Please tune in next time to stay up to date on all the latest Salt Lake City government news, updates, and COVID-19 information and resources. Tune in next time. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar.
meeting started?
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and get started again.
Sorry. And budget amendment number 5 was on the agenda for a discussion. We had pulled it because there weren't many follow-up items. Ben did clarify with me that there actually isn't adoption scheduled for this until next week, so we do have a few days to figure it out. And he also clarified that where we landed last week with the hand positions was, or the last time we discussed it, was that the grant-funded positions would be adopted by the council, but the positions from the hiring freeze would not. So the grant-funded positions would be funded, but through the grant fund, so that when the grant ended, the positions ended, so it wouldn't affect the staffing document, but that the hiring freeze positions would not. So maybe what we can do with CAN in the next few days is clarify, based on the earlier discussion, if that is still the most ideal sort of mix of things, or if there's a better way to handle that for the council adoption as it relates to the housing mitigation loss and other housing stuff discussion. So I just wanted to clarify that because I told you guys that there was adoption scheduled for tonight, so my apologies.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, thank you for that update / clarification. So we're at agenda item number 7, which is a joint city council mayor resolution establishing electrified transportation goals. And for this, we have Sam Owen from the council office policy, or analyst for the council office, Vicki Bennett from sustainability, and Debbie Lyons from sustainability. So I'll go ahead and start with you, Sam, and then we'll turn it over to Vicki Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few brief introduction on this resolution regarding electrified transportation. The council is receiving its first briefing regarding an electrified transportation resolution proposed by the administration. The resolution is proposed to be adopted jointly as soon as December 8, 2020, pending council feedback and approval. The resolution would express support for the following elements becoming or being reinforced through city policy in relation to electric vehicles, in addition to some others not listed here. I'll just read some of the policy positions that are supported in the resolution. That conventional fuel reduction and fiscal responsibility are compatible and mutually supportive goals, that reduction of fossil fuels would improve air quality and stabilize long-term success of our community, that public health would benefit from propagation of electric vehicle usage by the city and corresponding reduction in fossil fuel consumption, that historically disadvantaged or marginalized groups face the most serious impacts from poor air quality, that increased electrification and transportation technology is needed to achieve deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and that Salt Lake City is responsible for providing infrastructure for safe and reliable travel options for residents and visitors that support a robust economy and minimize negative impacts of transportation. Again, those are policy positions that are articulated in the resolution. Finally, the resolution goes further to propose a series of goals related to city fleet composition in terms of electric vehicles, other transit goals in terms of collaboration with UTA, the Utah Transit Authority, equitability in terms of access to electrified and smart mobility services, and the development of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Again, these are goals that are articulated in the resolution clauses at the end after the whereas clauses. Staff understands that specific budget figures or requests related to these goals have not been developed at this point. So those are just kind of higher level goals. They don't necessarily have those mechanical or budgetary details worked out at this point. So with your leave, Mr. Chair, I'd turn it over to the administration to discuss the resolution further and answer questions.
Okay. Vicki Bennett, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'll turn it over to Debbie in a moment, but just as a overall to frame this, realizing that we do have the goal that has been set in previous resolutions, 80%
reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, this would be one arm of that. You know, we're having good success when it comes to finding ways to decarbonize our electric grid. We are looking now at the other areas that we can try and improve upon, one of them being transportation and how we can reduce the amount of fossil fuels there. And then the other one we are doing some internal work and investigation on is how we could potentially electrify buildings, because so much of our air emissions and use of fossil fuels is from natural gas burning in all of our homes and buildings. So we're also working on that. So I'll let Debbie go into a little bit more detail on this resolution though.
Great, thank you. So as has been mentioned, the electrified transportation resolution is a joint resolution we're proposing with the City Council and the Mayor, just serving as a formal expression of supporting electrified transportation as one important piece of the puzzle in meeting our carbon reduction goals that Vicki mentioned, especially as we're making steps in powering our city and our community with clean, renewable energy. And we certainly recognize that people move around in all sorts of ways, and getting around by bike and walking are probably the least impactful. But we also rely on motorized transportation, whether it's by public transportation, our own vehicles, ride sharing. And we know that on-road transportation accounts for almost 20% of our energy-related carbon emissions as a community, and that almost 50% of the fine particulate matter during inversions. So through 2019 and 2020, the Sustainability Department worked with the Fleet Committee and city departments to develop the resolution and establish the goals that will advance electrified transportation in our community. And the resolution focuses on 3 areas of action for the city. One is electrifying our internal fleet. Second, working with our partners to electrify the public transportation system. And third, pursuing policy and programs that advance public adoption of electric vehicles. So this resolution is just an important way we can show our joint commitment to focus on electrified transportation as one important and necessary solution to addressing climate change and improve our air quality. Like Sam mentioned, it doesn't contemplate or request specific budget, but as you know, as it's expected that as we look at the financial impacts of these decisions, that we would be looking at a total cost of ownership for internal fleet vehicles rather than just the upfront cost, because we know that a lot of times the upfront cost is often quickly offset by lower fuel and maintenance costs. But we would work across departments to develop decision making that would be the most financially make sense in the financial scheme of things. So with that, I would turn it over to you guys if you have any questions.
Council members, any questions or comments on this? Okay, great. Well, it doesn't look like it. So thank you, Vicki and Debbie, for being with us, and thank you, Sam, for introducing that discussion.
Great, thank you.
We'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is a review of the 2021 annual meeting calendar. So if everybody can pull that up. And who, let's see, is taking us through this? Oh, Bridget from the City Council office is going to take us through this.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And this is Bridget's first time at the table. So, way to go, Bridget.
I'm sorry I can't use my camera. My WebEx crashes every time.
That's okay.
Just have audio.
Okay. Well, you don't get a picture then.
Okay.
But go ahead.
All right. So, Amanda, if you could please pull up the internal calendar. And internal just refers to, it shows like holidays, school dates, travel, things like that, so the council can sort of see from a bird's eye view what you're scheduling around. And I will go ahead and walk through the list of questions and conflicts if that works for the council. Okay, so every year we get this to you around this time and we try to post it by the end of December for the public. And the public doesn't see this view. They get a simplified version, and that was just due to feedback a couple years ago that with all of the edits, it just got a little cluttered and confusing. So for January, the first question I have for you is that typically the council holds a workshop or retreat, and then sometimes again in the fall. Some possible dates for that, although it is typically discussed by the incoming chair and vice chair. You can do that on Tuesday the 26th, or there are the Thursdays as well. Are there any thoughts on that?
I think we should probably just let that be set by the next chair.
Okay, sounds good.
Unless, does anybody else have any thoughts they want to add?
Mr. Chair, I think I prefer a Tuesday since I already blocked out that time. Thursday would be better for me personally.
Okay. Good feedback. Anyone else? Yeah, same is true for me, but
okay,
we'll let the new chair make that decision.
Okay, I've made that note.
Thank you.
Alrighty, and then next is a reminder, FYI, of the Mayor's State of the City address. I know COVID could potentially throw a wrench in some of those plans or just change those. Generally, it's held at the end of January. And if the mayor does choose to do it during a council meeting, it's typically been placed during opening ceremonies. Oh, thanks, Amanda.
Okay. Mayor, do you have any info you want to add at this time, or have you started planning that? Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
that is the time frame we're looking at, and I would very much appreciate that spot on the formal, if you can.
Okay. On the 19th?
We're flexible with when in the end, that latter half of January.
Okay. Well, I guess maybe we should just tentatively plan on the 19th, and then if there's a problem, we can figure that out in early January.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll make a note that it's tentative for the 19th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, next up, just some dates of note for January, the holidays, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and then the 19th, the state legislative session is scheduled to begin the 19th this year, and that just changed recently.
Okay.
And then are there any other mental flags that were thrown for January? Should we move on to February?
Go ahead and move on.
Sounds good. All right, then for February, the only real date of note is the NARO conference. You'll see that for travel for this document this year, I put originally scheduled, and that was for just to indicate that with COVID, these dates were set before COVID happened. So these dates could change. They could be a hybrid format. We're not sure yet.
Okay.
On to March. The only conflict to note is NLC, which again, the format could change. Typically, the council has adjusted the meetings to accommodate that conference. Would you like to do that again this year?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The NLC meeting, the Congressional City Conference will be virtual in March again.
Okay.
That was announced at this year's City Summit. And I would ask that we still block off that Tuesday. I'm pretty sure I'll be pretty busy during, even if it's virtual. And so I would ask that we rearrange that Tuesday, February or March 9th date
Okay. Does anyone have any objections to that?
No, Mr. Chair, but I think I would agree with Councilmember Fowler, but I'd also extend it to the year. I think maybe we just plan ahead as if they're all going on, because then they'd be virtual, and then we could adjust if we needed to. I'm guessing second half of the year is more likely to have actually in-person conferences, but Councilmember Fowler brings to the point that a lot of us may be participating virtually in conferences anyway. We might as well treat them as if we were going away.
Okay. Any objections to that?
Nope.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I will get that adjusted. So would you want the RDA and work session on the 16th and then add a formal, or would you like to have an RDA work session on the 16th and then a work session and formal on the 23rd? Amanda, could you swap back to the other view, please? The other document, rather. Thank you.
Do we, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? Do we have anyone on from RDA staff? I think is Danny on right now? I don't know that he was planning on it, but it can sometimes, depending, I don't know what the agenda for RDA would look like in March, but it can get a little packed if we try to do RDA plus work session plus formal. I mean, we do it sometimes, but my suggestion would be, unless there is any sort of timing issue, which we can double check with Danny or RDA staff, to put the RDA and work session down to the 23rd.
Okay. Anyone have any?
Follow up with Danny or his staff and see if there's different timing issues that he can think of that we'd need to rearrange that.
Yeah. And I'm happy to reach out and ask about that and get back to you.
Okay.
Okay.
April.
So given what Council Member Johnston just asked, the APA conference is in, Oh, yes. This is, yes, a little bit tricky. Would the council like to adjust the May 4th RDA and work session meetings? This timing just gets a little bit tricky with budget setting the dates and the mayor's budget presentation.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm reading the text, but yeah, go ahead.
Would it be possible to do, since work session, formal session for May 4th falls on an APA conference day that someone may or may not want to attend, could we move that work session and formal session up to the 27th? And maybe somebody in our council staff can tell me, would that May 4th be the anticipation of the budget briefing, the first budget briefing, or?
Yes, that's when it, I think, is by state law.
So would we not be able to move it up to the 27th? Is that?
This is Cindy. I think you couldn't, the mayor isn't obligated to provide the budget until the first Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
So you can have a meeting earlier. It wouldn't necessarily include a mayor's presentation because that's not due till later. There've been, I think, just one case that I know of where a mayor has chosen to present early, but they often need all the time possible, because there's so many loose ends. So
In that case, I would suggest we just leave it on the 4th. It is the last day of a conference. And so, I mean.
Yeah. Okay. And everyone okay with that? Just leaving that one since it is the last day of the conference? Okay, looks like it.
Okay.
May?
And then a note I did have for April, sorry, it didn't make it over to this questions document. The ULCT mid-year conference typically takes place the end of April, but no dates were posted as of about a month ago. So we'll keep an eye on that and get back to you.
Okay.
And then moving on to May. We have a similar situation that we had this year in that there are, this year there are 4 Tuesdays, and typically there are 5. This year the council confirmed a Thursday meeting to accommodate time for budget briefings. Would you like to do that again this year?
I think we should, just because it's a lot easier to plan ahead now. Anyone have any objection to that? Okay, let's do that.
Okay, Amanda, could you switch over to the other document, please? Thank you. Is there, per usual, we've marked all of them as tentative. That way we can, it's pretty easy to confirm them if you need it. Would you like a certain Thursday as of right now?
No.
Okay. Jennifer, with budget scheduling, is there one that you think would be a good suggestion?
This year, didn't we do the last 2 Thursdays?
I was just going to say, I think sometimes the first couple Thursdays feel a little bit premature to sort of have a lot of those extra discussions. And so I would say you could probably cancel the first 2 Thursdays, but keep the last couple. Maybe even cancel the 3rd Thursday, but you can always add it, I guess, is the other thing. Yeah. It's just nice to have people's schedules kind of blocked out, but it also is up to you guys.
So I can confirm the 27th for now, and then we can adjust as needed. If that's what you prefer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get that changed. And then similar problem in June. There are fewer Tuesdays again. I'm sorry, in June, since there are fewer Tuesdays in May this year, the council might want to just consider that consider the budget adoption schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And a reminder that
sorry, I missed this.
I was just going to jump in. The state law has bumped back the deadline for the council to adopt the budget to the end of June. I think from a practical perspective, and especially from the perspective of if there were to be a mayoral veto and then we have to work through that process, it really helps the city minimize dysfunction by the council adopting by like that 3rd Tuesday at the latest. And so, or actually, I guess in this case, it would be the 4th Tuesday. So we can leave those as tentative, but maybe, I don't know if there's clarification we should put out there. Cindy, yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Usually by the 2nd Tuesday, that's the date by which these we're supposed to receive all of our tax information. And it's, we usually only do have 2 meetings in June. If you get to the 15th, we're barely alive. By the 22nd, I don't know that any of us will still be standing. So the 22nd and 29th, I would say, let's try not to have a meeting then. If you have 3 meetings in June, that's 1 more than is in policy. So it's anticipated that you have 2 meetings in June. If you want to just plan on 3, That's better than 5
Mhm.
or 9.
If
Yes.
we do 9 meetings in June, I am pretty sure I can't even imagine the consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, I can guarantee my own sanity till the 8th. Past that, I don't know. Never tried it. So anyway, I mean, you could list it till the 15th, but I would not list past that, Jennifer, unless you really feel strongly about it.
I think it's always safe to go with the annual calendar with what we think we're going to do, and then we can. There's no prohibition against adding meetings, right? It's just a matter of getting council schedules cleared. So.
Let's keep the up until the 15th is what I think. And it looks like no one is opposing that. So.
Okay.
Okay.
On to July and August. Keeping with the council's practice, you typically only schedule 2 meetings during those months to accommodate schedules. Both meetings will include work sessions and formal meetings, and then an RDA meeting will be on the second Tuesday. And then an FYI, just sort of that is bunched into July and August. CIP needs to be adopted by September 1st. And so the council may just want to consider only meeting 4 times between July and August may not provide enough time for CIP discussions. Let's see, and then on to July. Specifically asking that we need to find out here, the council, like I said, typically avoids scheduling more than 2 meetings, and then also avoid scheduling near summer holidays. So this year, with the way the holiday falls for Independence Day, that's a holiday before our meeting on the 6th. So if you'd like to change that, I'm happy to.
So typically if you have a meeting that's close to a holiday, you might bump it so you could switch to the 13th and 20th, or if you're fine on the 6th, just leave it the 6th and 13th.
Anyone have any preference?
I guess I prefer 14th and 20th.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd bump them as well.
I'd bump them the same.
Okay. 13th and 20th.
Okay, and we'll shift everything down a week. Alrighty, then on to August. Again, just that reminder that CIP needs to be adopted by September 1st. In August, if needed, the council would need to hold a truth and taxation hearing. Staff requests that date early in the year. But ultimately the county confirms that hearing date. And that's with the tricky one that it can be the only item on the agenda that night. So we'll typically have a 6 p.m. formal meeting and then a 7 p.m. truth and tax, or however you decide to choose that timing.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Bridge, if I interrupted you.
Please go ahead.
Can we move the RDA work session and formal session from the 10th? That's an election day.
Yeah, don't we usually not meet on election days?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why we review. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, go ahead. Sorry.
This first Tuesday is generally not out against crime as well. The 3rd.
Mm.
That's true.
Have you switched that to the Thursday, or just moved it to another Tuesday?
And this is where we get into a little bit of trouble with the truth and taxation hearing, because it has to be held on a Tuesday. It has to be held before the 17th, which in this case is good because we actually have a Tuesday the 17th. But I have to check and make sure with the county that no one else has scheduled theirs for that day. So I will do that tomorrow if you guys decide on that schedule. But I may be back to you if they tell me no.
And I think, sorry, Chris.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, do we have to meet on the 24th as the board of canvassers, or is that just like tentative, or?
Typically, you have to meet 14 days after an election, and so that would be the 24th.
Okay.
But just a note that that would be determined based on any primaries. So if there are no city elections with primaries, then you would not need to.
Right. Okay.
I have a question on the CIP discussions. Are those lengthy? Because I don't recall the last one because we didn't have one. Is that
the CIP
lengthy?
discussions are usually pretty lengthy. We had a couple this last year, but they were kind of spaced out. So maybe it didn't feel like one long one, but in other years there has been one long one.
Okay. And when are those applications due? So we can start reviewing them, because if we only have a couple of times, we got the truth and taxation.
So the process is actually, the applications are actually reviewed by a citizen board, starting actually pretty soon. In fact, maybe even now. They're due in sometime in December. The citizen board meets in January and February and makes their recommendation to the mayor. And so what you guys get is actually a full package from the recommendations from the citizen board and the recommendations from the mayor. So you don't necessarily need to go through each and every application and discuss each and every one. Although sometimes you have pretty lengthy conversations about one or another. And so that's how your discussion is focused. And, you know, it's really ranged in some years. Some years it's been a very long discussion where the council has had very different approach from the administration. In other years, the council's pretty comfortable with what the administration recommended. And so it's a pretty short conversation. And so it kind of just depends.
Thanks.
So I can adjust August to, would you like a work session informal on the 17th and then an RDA work session RDA informal on the 24th, or what would you like that to look like, do you think?
I think that would be a good idea. And then, but I think we need to make sure that we can have the truth and taxation on the 17th. So I don't know if we tentatively put a work session and formal session on the 17th, but keep the one on the 3rd as well, in case we can't do truth and taxation on the 17th and need to do it on the 3rd. Jen, thoughts? Anyone else?
We can't double up on the 24th.
Sorry, say that, Councilmember Johnston.
We have to have the Board of Canvassers on the 24th, and usually it's just a short sort of formal thing, but we could do a work session on that week as well with the formal.
Yeah. The only issue with that Tuesday the 3rd, Councilmember Fowler, was that I think I heard earlier that that's the night out against crime, which depending on COVID sometimes has more community events.
Right, I understand that. I just worry about not being able to do our truth and taxation on the 17th, which needs to be done that day.
Right. And maybe what we can do, and we've done this in years past when we've had unpleasant surprises from the county, is just amend your annual meeting calendar. Because we do tend to know pretty well in advance, you know, usually by February or March, what the date reservations look like. So we can do.
In that case, I would be fine moving those two meetings down 2 weeks. So it would go 17-24.
Okay, can make that change.
I mean, not like I'm the only person that has a say I choose, so that's just my opinion.
Are there any other, I know August is a little tricky. next year. Are there any other questions or concerns I can make a note of for you?
No, I think doing the 17th and 24th kind of resolves it.
Okay.
So.
All righty. And on to September. Similar situation with ULCT, the fall annual convention. The dates haven't been decided, but typically that is hosted in Salt Lake the third week of September. And it typically has not conflicted with the council meeting, so that's more of an FYI. Let's see, in October, no conflicts, just some travel to note. The NARO conference and Revolution, which is at the end of the month and goes into the beginning of November. See, and then for November, December, similar with July and August, the council typically only schedules 2 meetings for holiday schedules. The Board of Canvassers meeting may be needed 2 weeks following the election, which would be November 16th. And then just make sure I've got all it's here for November and December. Oh, that's right. The NLC City Summit was originally scheduled for November 17th through November 20th in Salt Lake. We'll keep an eye on that to see what that's going to look like with COVID. I think that's all we've got. So I will make those changes and send it for final review to council, just for any final flags that may have come up or any final questions or conflicts. And I will keep track of those notes to follow up on with scheduling dates, like for truth and tax. And then at the end of the document, an FYI of lots of school dates for anyone who may need to reference them.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. Report. I don't have any reports for today. Andrew, do you have any? Nope. Okay. Cindy?
Nope.
Okay. So, council members, we do have a closed session scheduled, and it's anticipated that we'll hear about pending or reasonably imminent litigation. Does someone want to make a motion? Oh, Katie.
I'm sorry, and also advice of counsel.
And also advice of counsel. Okay.
Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to move that we go into a closed session for purposes of pending litigation and advice of counsel.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Fowler, a second from Councilmember Mono. Is there any discussion to this motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and roll call it. Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Valdemoros is absent on parental leave. Councilmember Mono.
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
Councilmember Fowler.
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. We'll go ahead and proceed to that meeting that there's a separate link for. See everyone over there.